All right. I am here with Rob Larson, who is a writer for current affairs and an economics professor. Um, and, they call him current affairs as House Economist. And also Brent Lengel, who I think is going to be muted for another minute because he's sorting out some technology issues. But so people may know, he's also a writer and other things, that he can tell us about later. But people may primarily know Brent, who watch this from the Modern Debate channel. But before before Brent fully joins us and we get and we actually get to the second half of the debate. This is a part two for anybody who's just tuning into this randomly. So we're watching Michael Albert's debate on capitalism, socialism, Albert's specific model of socialism, which is called parecon, participatory economics, with the Twitch streamer known as Destiny. And I'm not actually. I know last time, I made an unkind joke about his name, which I always do, sort of on general principle, not just for him, but for like any of these like Twitch streamers, who go by a handle rather than their name. Might be an arbitrary prejudice, but that always strikes me as a bit silly. But in any case. Oh, hey, we got Brett.
There we go. That's the good camera and the good microphone.
Yeah, much improved from where we were earlier. So anyway, whatever. I always maybe I'm just a fragile, premature boomer about that sort of thing, but I will always make fun of the Twitch handles. Well, before we get down to the business of the second half of the debate, so as I just mentioned, it's a 2.5 hour debate, and these things take a long time because what we do, for those of you who haven't watched any of the previous 15 of these, is we do these in-depth breakdowns of debates. So we talk for a while, set it up. We start watching, we watch a little bit of it, we stop, we talk about what we watched. So it takes a long time to get through. So last week we watched the first hour and 18 minutes of the 2.5 hour debate. And that hour and 18 minutes with all the stopping and talking took us about 3 hours and 20 minutes. So it's a time consuming process. That's why we broke this up into two parts. Probably also going to do that at some point in April because I think that'll be the 2-year anniversary of Zizek Peterson, and that's too much catnip for this channel for us not to do that. And that's another long one, right? So we'll probably also break that up into two parts, like a shitty Hollywood trilogy where they split the third book into two movies. But before we kind of recap the substance, the substance of it, I think it's worth talking about a couple things that, since obviously this is something that lots of people who might not normally watch these, have watched, since, because of course, anything that involves Michael Albert, it's going to be, that's just going to be catnip, to YouTube, or possibly it's the other guy. I don't know. But there's just so many parecon fans out there. That's what does it.
There's so many out there that they're rabid. They're really, really all about parecon, and they want to make sure that we take the whole thing seriously.
They will not brook any criticisms of parecon.
No, certainly not. Now, I will say, in between this, in between this, I did go on Destiny's stream for like about 2 hours to play Peacemaker, and we actually had a really good conversation. So I'm really excited about that. He apparently took my the fact that I mentioned I'd wanted to debate him seriously on the last channel. So we will actually be having a debate that's upcoming as well. So yay, the internet works kind of sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there were kind of. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the reaction to the first video, or do you want to just jump into this next one?
A little bit about it. So there are a couple of things I want to touch on. One is about economics, and it's kind of a broader thing that came up in the first one. But I guess first, might as well do Pizza Ghazi. So much like Benghazi, where they do, they did like 300 hearings about it. But the issue wouldn't die. The 2.5 minutes that were spent talking about pizza in the original stream are something that Destiny's fan base latched onto pretty hard. And it's kind of a funny thing, I guess to be fair, a lot of them only watched the hour or whatever that he watched, which was mostly just us watching the video. So they missed most of the 2 hours of us talking. But like what we primarily do here is almost entirely about the argument side of what's going on in debates, right? There's very little about rhetoric or any of that stuff, right? But that said, I find all this stuff interesting. Somebody brings up rhetoric, I'm certainly not going to shut them down. So this was brought up. I think Brent said literally, I'm not sure if this is what was going on here or not, but sometimes I think that this can be this could be something that people do as a sort of way of undermining the other person, making their case, or sort of a power move or something. And despite the fact that, when that originally came up, I think I said that's interesting. To be fair, I don't think that's what's going on here. I think it just streams for hours and hours straight. And so sometimes it gets hungry. And then later when it came up again, since he did eat a remarkable amount of pizza in the stream.
It took quite a, yeah.
That was like,
there was like 45 minutes of pizza just drawn out through the whole first thing.
If I wasn't doing a debate, like if I was just like sitting there eating pizza, unless I was like very stoned, I don't think I'd go through that much pizza. But in any case, but then the second time it came up, so first time it came up, I said, to be fair, I don't think it was going on. That's what's going on. And you said, fair enough. And the second time it came up, I made what I thought was a self-deprecating joke about how I'm always drinking during these things. Mm-hmm. But that was a big thing. That's something that, like, if you looked at the Destiny fan community, you'd think that it was 2 hours of pizza talk. And
it was the pizza heard round the world. What I'd just like to say for me bringing this up, again, this is not something that I was specifically accusing Destiny of. It's behavior that I'd seen out of other debaters as well before. So this was a chance to talk about it because, part of this is to break down debates for people who are interested in debate. At least for me personally, like my philosophical approach to debate, and Ben, one of the first times you were on my channel, I mentioned this, was that each debate kind of breaks down into logos, pathos, and ethos. Ethos dealing with yourself and the style that you deliver something, and also your credentials. Pathos dealing with emotional connection with the audience, and logos dealing with the actual arguments themselves. I feel everything within a debate, like if it's a televised debate, factors into that. And so, I feel like it's a valid thing to remark on. But, also I understand that it can also be a bit strange for some people to see it if they're not used to thinking about the performance element of the debate, and if they're only focusing on the logos.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess to be fair, obviously if I'm doing it myself, I try to think a little bit about the performance aspect because it's just an unavoidable part of it. like you can't not, or if you don't, it's not going to go very well. But but certainly when I'm breaking down debates or whatever, it's almost all whichever one logos, whichever one is just like the actual substance of the arguments, because my entire nerdy pedantic mission in life is to get people to care more about that. So yeah, and I guess I should also say I think there was some dispute, Brent, about the way that you described the Destiny's moral system and his reaction to the riots last summer. But instead of getting into all of that here, I will just say that is the exact subject you're going to be arguing about with him this coming week, right?
Indeed, and I think it'll be a very good, stimulating argument for everybody all around. Because I was actually pretty surprised. He was very chill when we spoke on stream, and I'm looking forward to an excellent, fun, good faith debate. So should be a blast.
Yeah, fair enough. So I don't know if we're going to, once we're done with all this, I'll message him, and I don't know if we're going to continue the debateception, by having another after the hour and a half or whatever you spent talking about with him about our stream about him. If I'm going to do another one with him about that, we'll see how much appetite there is on both sides for that. I will say again, I think I mentioned this last time, being a ridiculous philosophy nerd, the thing that really intrigued me that came up in passing in the first one was his thing about free will and determinism. So someday I actually would like to have a debate with him about that.
I would love to see that.
But then I guess the last thing I was going to mention from the reaction to the first half, just because I think it's worth unpacking a little bit, is something. I mean, I haven't seen almost any of this because I haven't watched his stream about us from last week. I haven't watched his conversation with Brent. Except for I think a couple minutes of each, just because, not because I don't think these things would be worthwhile, but just because it's a lot of hours of YouTube, and it's a lot. There's a lot of this is part of the reason I started doing these Sunday night debate breakdowns is I thought it'd be a fun excuse to actually get myself to watch some of these debates that are available on YouTube. So I don't. I'm not very good at setting aside hours at a time to watch these things. So this is secondhand, so it could be wrong. But I believe he also had a reaction to Rob saying something about economics, being all about ideology, and I think that's worth unpacking a little bit, because this sort of transitions us back to the actual substance of the debate, because I think somebody could. I mean, to be fair, I do see how somebody could really misinterpret that. Oh, sorry, Brent. Somebody in the chat wanted to know, what day are you doing that?
It's going to be on Friday. It's this coming Friday, 8:00. It's already, if you go on the Modern Day Debate channel, it's actually already been announced and the time is set. So we're both really excited to do it.
Yeah. Oh, and also there was this extremely important question. So I'm a big fan of Ardbeg. I like all of the really peaty Elay whiskeys, your Lagavulins and Lefroy's, Talisker. It's I think Isle of Skye, not Elay, but it's a nice smoky one. This is just going through the very last of the Port Charlotte that my wife got me for the holidays. But yes, thank you. That's good to direct us back to the important stuff. But yeah, so I could see how somebody could misunderstand what Rob was saying about economics and ideology, but I mean, I also think what he said was correct and important. So I'll throw it to Rob in just a second to speak more about that if he wants to. But I think the distinction, as I would understand it, is the point is not that there's no value to any of the formal tools that you use when you study economics, or certainly that there's no empirical component to some economic research that's important and valuable and illuminating. It's that economics, I'm sorry, this is true, is not physics. It's not, and to be fair, like most social sciences, none of the social sciences are quite physics, although I'd argue that economics is on the extreme other end. Because physics, biology, chemistry, these sorts of sciences, it's not that there aren't internal debates within them. Of course there are, right? Like you can always find Stephen Jay Gould going back and forth with Dawkins about punctuated equilibrium versus steady state evolution or whatever. Physicists arguing about string theory and how to make special relativity and quantum mechanics compatible and all that stuff. So there are these debates within every field, but broadly speaking, most of these scientific fields tend to converge on broadly agreed on theoretical frameworks within which these debates happen. And economics just doesn't. There are very intense debates within economics about the most basic parts of the theoretical framework.
Yeah.
And there does seem to be a lot of, maybe it's a big coincidence, but there does seem to be a lot of alignment, in many cases between what people's political preferences are and which of these theories that they have, right? I mean, it's somehow or another, people, who are social democrats who want to ramp up spending seem to be much more likely than libertarians are to believe in modern monetary theory, and somehow or another, libertarians seem to be much more likely to believe in Austrian economics, than social democrats are. And that's not to say that there aren't exceptions or there aren't people with unusual combinations of views, but it does mean that I think it's justifiable to be a little wary when economists or people who are just economics, fans say, oh, you have to believe X, Y, and Z because it follows from this theoretical framework in economics.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's like a major part of it. And, I mean, obviously we were speaking sort of off the cuff last week, but just to say, looking at economics and holding it up to the real sciences, like the natural sciences or the hard sciences, like people sometimes say, physics and chemistry and biology. I can say with a little bit of confidence about this because my undergrad was actually in biology. That's what I did my bachelor's in. But biology, what are you going to do with that? Be a doctor? That's embarrassing. You should teach at a community college, I told myself. So I fulfilled that dream instead. But it's actually a good way to get into the social sciences is studying the natural sciences because it lets you realize what it means to call something a science and what counts as evidence and what a real argument is. I remember Chomsky always says the same thing because, he obviously comes out of the sciences himself. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. We have a number of extant economics schools today, the various Keynesians and neo-Keynesians and post-Keynesians, and the more conservative ones, your neoclassical synthesis, which is a broad spectrum, and the more conservative Austrians, and you have Marxist economists and so on. It's kind of like what Ben said, the real sciences, they go through big changes, and sometimes we even call them revolutions over time, but they never completely throw away the previous stuff, we go from the Newtonian to the Einsteinian view of big scale physics. It wasn't based on throwing out Newton. It's making changes based on specific relativistic conditions. It builds, it discards some things, but it's all about building on that edifice. In economics, we have fundamental disagreement over macroeconomic issues, microeconomic issues, how the system works, how markets work. And then we don't make any movement toward consensus on those issues is kind of the big thing. Even the sciences that are struggling to understand something make some slow advances over time. In economics, everyone's still, yelling past each other to a significant extent. There is a broad mainstream body of economists who sort of, work for business and government and tend to do much of the teaching jobs, although every kind of weird economist can find a niche in academia, as I myself have discovered, What it means you realize is, these things tend to map pretty closely to people's political or just broader social ideologies. And Ben's right, there are exceptions, with individuals, you get every kind of weird combination and figures who transgress the usual boring boundaries. But that doesn't negate the fact that we can clearly see these sort of political tendencies. And folks, we're here to look at this debate, but just to say, if folks want to dig a little bit more into these issues of economics, I really recommend the late Ed Herman's book, Triumph of the Market. He has an article in there, I bet you can find that online too, called Economics, the Politicized Science, which I thought was very thoughtful and gets to a lot of these issues. Herman, of course, was Chomsky's co-author on the original Manufacturing Consent book. And also, just for my part, I've got a thing where I talk about economics a little bit and just, again, try to compare it to the sciences, look at where we do some evidence-based, like data-based work in economics, which is more within the scientific ethos than like what the neoclassicals or especially the Austrians do, which is just pure thought experiment, which I wouldn't say useless, but it's kind of useless. You can thought experiment your way into any goofy conclusion, but what it means, though, is it is like it tends to map onto people's ideologies. And so these economic schools, they tend to focus on completely different subjects about what's important. Frankly, to me, when I look at economics today as a broad field, it resembles more, at least my understanding, of philosophy. Like schools of philosophy often don't like directly disagree with each other. They just emphasize like utterly different aspects of the world, But anyway, I have an article in my old original book, Bleakonomics, that looks at some of this stuff too and tries to look at that data. Because again, a lot of economists work hard to get data-based economics, and there's experimental economics and empirical economics. These are schools of the field. But again, it's the social sciences. You can't do controlled experiments like you can in a lab. You can't, just the issue of time lag alone is enough to just annihilate any opposing argument that anyone feels like. It's just tough, even with historical experiments, to make real like progress on anything like a level that deserves to be called a science, where we control things and where we have a good faith debate and we want to look at each other's data sets and so on. I would just say to Destiny, he should just take a look at some of that a little bit and just think about how much we want to say that economics qualifies as a science, the stuff that lets us keep the lights on and vaccinate people against diseases and shit.
Yeah, right. I like that, and I, and I like that you compare it to philosophy. Another thing that I obviously see a lot of value in, but it's not like I'm under no illusions, that it has you can, that philosophical arguments, let you have like state things with the sort of epistemic authority that you get from doing laboratory experiments and things like that. It's always, there's always going to be more room for reasonable people to disagree than that. So it's not that, it's not that Rob doesn't think that people, the students are learning valuable things in his classes, that he teaches, but, it's that, like, we just, especially, when people say, like, again, I think a lot of these models probably latch on to certain aspects of a very complicated reality. But like, when people have these like very simple a priori models, and they say, oh, if you understood economics, you would know that blah, blah, blah. You should always take that with like a lot of salt. And I also really like what Rob said about how it's economics is at its best when it treats itself as a social science and is in the business of like actually looking at the empirical data.
Exactly. And I don't particularly mean to cast aspersions on philosophy with that. I just feel that my field needs to be put in its place. No, and we talk about the social sciences, which is itself kind of a goofy thing. But I just got to say real fast, econ gets so much respect from people. I can talk to scientists and say I'm an economist, and they go, whoa, an economist, interesting, which is just incredible. Like the field is such a mess. We fail to anticipate giant disasters like the 2008 finance crisis. That's not like the virus. Like that just came from our own shitty banks and weak regulatory systems, So it's a field that just doesn't deserve the huge amount of differential treatment it gets. That's all. And to answer Mr. World's question, it's a nice, cheap green tea blend that I'm enjoying. So it's earlier here. I can't, I drink later.
Yeah, that's fair. And somebody asked in the chat, about like, look, obviously I'm a big fan of logical argumentation, but I also think that, okay, if you're arguing about normative things, about values, that's one thing, right? Because you're trying to figure out how to make your, what you value internally consistent. If you're arguing about things that have factual components, it's not that the logic chopping, can't help, right? But like you better have solid empirical information about the thing about which you're arguing at the foundation of that. So that's the distinction that I would make. So last week on Destiny versus Michael Albert, they got into a lot of Albert's. Well, they got into a lot of the question of how it is that you should evaluate economic systems. So, like, what are the kind of criteria that we should use, to decide whether something's the best economic system that you could have, and as we were finishing up the first half last week, we were just starting to get into like, I think in the next part, right? It's been a week. I'm a little fuzzy, but I think we're just getting up to the point where Albert is really going to to argue for his own preferred system. We've already got a little bit of that. He talked about how you want to take away ownership from capitalists, have workers control, but also how it's not good enough just to change the ownership relations because of the concern about 80% of people doing more menial tasks that are less empowering, and like 20% of people doing more empowering tasks, which means not just managerial tasks, which even like an elected manager might be doing, but tasks that involve interacting with more aspects of a workplace in such a way that if you were going to like workers' council meetings, you would have more to say about how the place should be run. That seemed to be what he meant by empowering. And so he's arguing for both having like workers' control, having workers democratically run the workplace, and also trying to find ways to give different workers a mixture of job tasks. So so everybody's doing at least some of this more empowering work, and they can more meaningfully participate in the internal democracy of a socialized workplace. And and we were, there was a lot of discussion, about whether how much we agreed with that, or how much Albert was putting the emphasis in the wrong place, and how much we think maybe like what you should really focus on is just having everybody be able to work fewer hours. So like rather than having a more empowering involvement in meetings about how to run the workplace, since after all, look, Rob's probably had more of this experience than I have, since my all of my teaching gigs with one except have pretty much been either being an adjunct, like I was for years at Rutgers, or sort of limited term full-time positions. So I haven't had to do too much of this, but I did have to spend like 2 years at a job where I had to go to faculty meetings like every month, and I just like at the like ones that went over like 2 hours, I just wanted to shoot myself in the head, when they got out. And so I'm pretty like that quote that's always attributed to Oscar Wilde. Matt like tells me he didn't really say it, but whatever, about how the problem with socialism is that it's too many damn meetings. Like I take that seriously, right? Like I would much prefer, like I'm pretty comfortable just doing representative, workplace democracy, especially if that's combined with finding ways to change the economic structure such that we can all work less, and instead of being more empowered at work, we could just have more time and leisure, and to pursue everything we want to do in our lives outside of work. So that's where we left off last time. Either of you guys want to throw anything in before we watch the second half?
I'm pretty much good, but there is one thing that I did want to clarify, because a couple of people had asked why we didn't focus or at least for me, why I didn't focus quite as heavily on Destiny's arguments in the first half. And the fact of the matter was that there weren't a lot of arguments to focus on coming from him. This was a lot of Michael Albert setting up his system and Destiny listening. And I think when we get into part 2, we're going to see a lot more arguments directly out of Destiny. There were a couple in part 1, but really Albert took up the vast, vast majority of that hour and 18 minutes that we listened to. Yeah, right.
I mean, and I know, look, I will trust Destiny. He labeled it as a debate on his YouTube channel, that he's going to be, making more aggressive criticisms, in the second half, but so far it was the first half was mostly Albert talking through his stuff, sort of laying out his premises, Destiny maybe sometimes asking somewhat like skeptical questions, or Albert asking Destiny if he would agree with some parameter, and Destiny being like, I don't know, So far there are a lot more Albert arguments to critique than Destiny arguments, but yeah, I'd imagine that'll change.
Yeah, indeed. And what Ben was saying about parecon as a system of like pretty heavy direct workforce, pretty direct a role in decision making in the future socialized economic workplace. Like, I think with the comment, we'll let Michael Albert talk about this. I'm sure we'll chop it up a lot more. But I think Ben's getting toward like the big objection people have is this is just more meetings than most people want to do. And there's a lot we can add to that. And luckily, just so folks know this going in, like we do have other models of socialist decision making, like a lot, including, that involve, as Ben sort of referred to, like different levels of representative, crucially representative, subject to recall. So as soon as people get to big for their britches, thinking that they're, I'm the senior vanguard part of the party suddenly, like, that you fucked up. You're out of there now. That's important. So there are other models too. But, and again, also just one last thing we said last week is in the socialist future, no one's going to do this exactly the same way. Like there are going to be workplaces, maybe especially smaller ones like academic departments. And yeah, I can definitely speak to that later too. Smaller workplaces, maybe parecon's the right approach. There's only 20 of us. We can all just be in one large room. It's fine. Any kind of large, modern industrial workplace, drawing a cloud computing network or an oil refinery or the world's telecommunication systems, direct democracy gets a little bit tougher for the socialist economy. And so different forms of representation we also have available in our socialist toolkit. Thank God.
Agreed. And I think also, different people have different levels of appetite, for like more involvement or less. I mean, for certainly as a matter of personality for me, just like being able, having like voting for somebody once a year and like, okay, we can always recall them if they fuck up, sounds way better to me because like 95% of the time, I think as long as like I'm getting my hours and I'm getting paid, like I mostly want to not have to think about it, but maybe other people, with different personality types, find, find more fulfillment and a more hands-on level of involvement. And, so maybe they can go to work at smaller, workplaces that have, that operate in a more directly democratic, model. And I should also say, we kind of mentioned this last time, like, I also don't expect, right? Like I do think that this is a worthwhile thing to do to try to figure out exactly, how a socialist society could realistically work. Because, if we don't do that, I think people will be understandably skeptical, that there is a way that it could work. But I never really think when I do that the goal of what like Marx calls in one of the introductions to Capital, writing recipes for the cookshops of the future. I never think that the goal of that is that like, however many years that you think any of this might happen, in the 2080s or whatever, people will say, aha, this is what Ben Burgess said in an article in Jacobin in 2021 about how we should structure our society. We'll have to follow this model exactly. I think that the goal is to, establish that there are reasonable answers to these questions, without necessarily having any illusions that if we're lucky enough to get socialism at all, the exact that these are the particular answers that people facing all sorts of unpredictable situations and like messy historical processes where whatever you get is always some strange combination of different forms you can dream up a priori, will be. I mean, like I'm sure. I'm sure nobody in those contexts is going to be paying that much attention, to these debates, nor necessarily should they. I mean, maybe we can figure out some things that'll be useful to them, but like for the most part, they'll be figuring it out for themselves. I think what we're doing when we think about how feasible socialism could work is showing that it is trying to answer reasonable doubts about whether it could work.
So I just really hope that in 200 years, 150, 200 years, there's if we get past global warming, there is like a Ben Burgessite running around with like a copy of Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, quoting you passage for passage and being like really insufferable about it.
Oh, and to answer 255 AD's question, it's called the culture. So that's what we call that. That's a Ian.
Culture runs super intelligent spaceships, and arachno-communism is when we allow people to be ruled fairly and egalitarianly by an over race of spiders, communist spiders.
Let's hope it doesn't come to that.
As long as the spiders give me health care, I'm okay with it.
Kent Brockman, I for one welcome our new insect overlords. All right, so enough of that. We've been on for over half an hour. We got to watch the rest of this if we're gonna all go to bed at a reasonable time tonight.
Let's watch.
But has retained the coordinator class and the working class, and has elevated the coordinator class to ruling class status. And the reason why in the Soviet Union the workplace looked the same, basically, as in the United States, and looked the same, basically, as in the United States, because you still had that 20% ruling over the 80%. So all of this discussion, what it's about, is eliminating that class division, because that class division basically robs society of the productive capacities of 80% of the workplace of the population.
Okay, sure. For the purposes of this conversation, we'll just grant that there is empowering work, that workers can measure that empowering work. Those two things. Okay, we'll grant that. Okay.
Okay.
So moving on, when it comes time to decide to like package these I guess like these hours of empowering and unempowering work together, do you think that any efficiency might be lost in an economic system where we no longer specialize our labor at all? So for instance, having doctors work in bathrooms or trying to train janitors to be doctors, like
right off, yes. I mean, something might be lost, and then we have to ask if something is gained. So let's take doctors. That's the obvious example that everybody always takes. It makes good sense.
Okay.
So let's say we take surgeons, and let's make believe, for the sake of discussion in our economy, that a surgeon works a 40-hour week and does 40 hours of surgery. Okay? Just for the sake of discussion. So in the change that I'm talking about, that would no longer be the case. So let's say the surgeon now works, 20 hours of surgery, and or even 15 hours of surgery, and various other tasks to create a balanced job complex.
Okay.
Right. So have we lost anything? Of course we have. In that particular case, we lost 25 hours of surgery, more than half. Right. And if we write it large to the whole economy, Margaret Thatcher is saying to me, "You're an idiot. You just consigned us to health hell. You just consigned us to miserable disaster of the loss of all this health care." The trouble is that we're not looking at the other part. What about the 80% of people who now, by virtue of a change, right, contribute to doctoring, right? So I'm saying that 80% can more than make up for the time of prior doctors or of people who specialize as doctors that's lost.
Okay, so I'm a capitalist.
Do you buy that or not?
I do, but I think there's a third party then that we need to analyze.
If you do, you're different than most folks.
Well, no, I mean, like, I would acknowledge that the 80% that maybe gets to take part in more, I don't like your term empowering, but in labor that lets you flex creativity or do more varied work is probably going to feel better about their lives than
but will they do a good job?
Well, that's not as good a job as the original. So the third class, I would say,
what makes you say that?
Because generally a lot of the higher education jobs require a degree of specialization, a type of training or education in order to be proficient at
Why
them.
can't the 80%? I'm not saying that the 80% can do it in 20 minutes.
Okay.
But over time, the question is, Why can't 100% of the workforce
Mm-hmm.
be contributing in a balanced way so that, the fact that no one is contributing 40 hours of surgery a week is made up for the fact by lots of people, instead of just those people, lots of people are doing 25 hours of surgery a week at just as high a quality.
Well, I don't know
That's
if
what
it's
I'm saying.
realistic or even desirable for all parts, for every single person to learn every single job at some company they work at.
It's insane. It's impossible and insane, but I didn't suggest that. I just said that out of the 80%, you have to make up that, right?
Out of the 80%, you have to make up that what?
The work that isn't being done
Yeah.
by the person who would have been specializing before.
Okay.
All right. So if you're in a hospital, say, and again, the surgeons are working 40-hour weeks, and we flash 10 years into the future, or 50 years, whatever it is, right? And we look at the same hospital, it has the same number of people, and now the surgeons are working 20 hours a week or 25 hours a week. Well, did we lose half the surgery? And I'm saying no, because the other employees in the hospital are now doing that surgery,
Sure.
and the doctors are doing stuff that they were doing.
Sure, but what I'm looking at is so from a quantitative approach in terms of hours worked, you're correct. The third group that I wanted to look at were consumers, though. So like, let's look at the consumers of healthcare, because
Right, you're willing to give me this already? Aren't you going to say? All right, here's what Margaret Thatcher would say. Margaret Thatcher would say, "You're out of your mind, Michael. You're a fucking idiot. The 80% cannot do surgery."
Well, that's what I'm getting to. So I would say
okay.
from a quantitative approach, you can make the 80% fill the 20%'s hours. But from a qualitative approach,
Okay.
I don't think that those people would be able to perform. I'm sure there's some percentage of like hidden doctors that either didn't have access to education or the opportunities in life to become surgeons. I'm sure there's some percentage of the 80% that could do that. But for the most part, I don't think the 80% that you draw from to do the surgery is going to have the same qualitative output as the 20%.
For me to be right,
okay,
it has to be the case that the 80%, right, are capable of doing, with a few exceptions, right? It's irrelevant.
Some obvious
are capable of doing empowered tasks, right? Some of those empowered tasks, some of them would be doing surgery, say, some of them would be doing something else. Okay, flashback 50 years.
Okay.
It's 50 years ago, right? We have a gigantic stadium. It's really big, and we put all the surgeons in the United States in that stadium. Okay.
Okay.
Let's actually make it 60 years ago. So 60 years ago, all the surgeons in the United States are in that stadium. Is there anything striking about that population of surgeons?
50 years ago?
50, 60 years ago, yeah.
I mean, I imagine they're probably very wealthy, very white, very straight, very educated. They probably come from affluent families. I mean,
they're all white and they're all male.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The occasional deviation.
Sure.
But they're all white, they're all male.
Okay.
And if you asked them, why aren't there women in here? Why aren't there blacks in here? They would say, well, because they can't do it. Right? That's, I assure you, I was around then. That's what people said. In fact, if you asked women and blacks, many of them would say, what are you talking about? We're not in there because that's not what we do. We can't
you can
do it.
internalize racism. You can internalize misogyny, of course.
Okay. Now let's take the present. Right? So what we're saying is, if you put all the surgeons in the stadium now, right, they're not working class, they're coordinator class.
Okay.
And the question is, we were wrong 50 or 60 years ago. It wasn't the case that women were any different than men, or significantly different in any respect than men, or blacks than whites. They were objectively at the time ignorant, not as confident, and on and on and on, right? But there were reasons for that.
But I would disagree. I would say you were correct in that black people or women really couldn't be doctors at that time, not because of any intrinsic like biological characteristic, but because they didn't have the training for it, right?
Right.
That training isn't.
So then you wanted to change society.
Sure, but like my question here is that I don't know if at a workplace, like we can rectify those differences in the 80%. Like every hospital would now have to have a medical school built into it. Every hospital would have to be perpetually employing and training people.
You know what we do now instead? What we do now is the doctors in the American Medical Association keep down the number of people who are trained to be doctors. Why do they do that?
In what ways? What do you mean by that?
In the admissions policies of the medical schools.
So they should
And in the
make
test
those
and everything
lax,
else.
or
They want to keep the number of doctors down. Why
Well,
is that?
well, I'm going to say because they want the level or quality of training to be at such a level that they're good doctors. You're going to
Yeah.
say it's to
Well,
further the divide between the 20 and the 80.
no, I'm going to say it's to increase the bargaining power of doctors.
So you think that
And if you look at the
doctors?
journals, you'll see that that's what it is.
So the
But it's
reason
not
why we
surprising.
have like the stringent requirements on what it needs, like the years of
No.
residency, the med school, it's because they just want to artificially.
A lot of it, yes. A lot of it is, in fact, like boot camp in the military. In other words, ask yourself, does being awake for 40 straight hours and giving medical care, is that I mean, are we really training people to do something that is valuable and which they need to do? Or are we putting them through boot camp so that they join a fraternity, the fraternity of doctors, and they keep out nurses and others, paramedics and the rest? They keep them down and they raise up their salaries and they function in accord with the owners of the hospital. Is that what's going on? Or is it real medical training? I don't know about you, but when I go to the hospital, I hope I don't get one of those people who's been up for 50 straight hours.
Yeah, I think he's right about this, Destiny. I've heard like people in the medical profession, they call it like hazing or whatever, and they're trying to like phase it out, but there's like a lot of resistance.
Hazing is a lot different. So like, for instance, so I've been like to study that like we could shorten medical training, sure. But like, even if we agreed that we could shorten medical training, there's still going to be like a high level. Like if our current level of training is 100 and 0 is no medical training, then maybe we can agree that it could be shortened to like 70 or 80. But there's still like a huge bar that like I'm not going to be a surgeon in a year's worth of training, right?
Fine, of course. Nobody said you could do this in a year, right? No, that's not the issue. And 50 years ago, the same thing that you just said was true for a black becoming a surgeon or a woman becoming a surgeon.
Sure, but the difference is that those differences weren't rectified in workplaces. Those were addressed outside of the workplace, for instance,
and this would have to be addressed outside of the workplace too. In other words, changing the whole economy in a fundamental way would involve changing the educational system. That's certainly true.
Okay, so then just to understand this, so you would pair this, like if you went and worked at a certain company and there were these different tranched stacks of like hours and different jobs at the company that you had to work. Once you figured out what you were going to work at that company, then you would go to the educational system that would train.
No. Just like, look, now it's the case that if you're in school, right, you want to get trained in certain things.
Okay.
Right? It may be in physics, right, and maybe in medicine, and maybe in something else, writing or whatever the hell it is, right?
Okay.
So you do that because that's one of the key pursuits that you want to do during your life, right? You would also get a broad education, a decision-making, various things that you would learn in context of a good education, I assume. And once you got into a workplace, there would be some on-the-job training, I'm sure, just as there is now, right?
So if I were to go to school,
I mean, most lawyers learn a lot of what they do in law after they get a job.
Sure, but
that's true of doctors too.
Sure, because you can't learn every single thing at school. But if anything, that makes this even more difficult for you. Like, it sounds like you're saying, like, if I go to school to become a computer programmer, I would also need to take classes away from my major to learn electrical work, janitor work, accounting work.
No, because everybody doesn't do everything. I agree with you. The notion that everybody is going to do everything is insane.
But how would you? But if you go to school,
has nothing to do with reality.
Well, but if you go to school as a computer programmer, how would you possibly know what you're going to be doing until you showed up at any particular job?
So you show up at a workplace that's creating computer programs. Okay. Because that's what you want to do. So I don't know, Apple or Microsoft, a workplace like that. Of course, it wouldn't look like Apple or Microsoft.
Of course.
But nonetheless, buildings where people do programming. Okay, so in those buildings where people do programming, the programming work requires certain kinds of background and knowledge and experience, and and the cleaning work requires much less. That's true. You pointed that out, and so does various other tasks require much less. And so inside that workplace, you would be doing programming, and you would also be helping to clean up, and you would be also doing certain other things. That would make for a balanced job complex.
Well, I guess it's, but like different programming like environments could be totally different jobs. So like I could get like a programming job working or maybe like an information tech job at like a hospital or something, right? And now the types of jobs that I would need to be able to work is going to be way different than if I got like a programming job working for like a lawyer firm. Like maybe I do like firewalls or something for them versus like I just don't know how you could even account for like the plethora of work that you might be thrown in depending
because most of the work or a lot of the work that you be getting in addition to the work that you trained for, right, is not hard to learn. It doesn't take particularly long to learn.
And you don't think it would be?
Let me give you that example of South End Press again for a minute,
Sure.
right? So we were a bunch of people who actually had been in graduate school together in economics, okay? And we got together and we decided we were going to make a political press because we thought there was need for one. So we were going to do that. So we had to learn how to typeset. We had to learn how to work with the authors. We had to learn how to edit. We had to learn how to clean the place. We had to learn, and so on. There's various tasks that we had to learn, some harder, some less hard. Okay, so we did all that. That's not beyond the human capacity. Remember that woman who learned how to do the accounting books?
Yeah, I mean, it's not beyond it. It's just like insanely inefficient. But I guess you're saying if the trade-off is everybody is happier, then, well, yeah, of course. Like as a business owner, like the first thing you learn is that like doing every job is literally the worst approach to owning a business, right? You have to
doing every job is insane. Okay.
Or even doing most
don't
jobs.
Keep doing that. Doing a few jobs in a balanced mix where what you've done is you've taken 80% of the population, right? And they are also doing empowered work. So they're doing conceptual work. So taking the women in 50 years ago, right? They're all of a sudden, their capacity to be doctors has been contributed to society. That's half the population. Their capacity to be lawyers or engineers has been contributed to the population. So you're unleashing all of that capacity, which previously had been essentially stamped out, right? By an education.
And so in this society, would literally every single worker be required at least like a 4-year education at like at a college or university or whatever?
Well, certainly educate in a good society, in a good economy. Such education would be free.
Even when you make it free, though, not necessarily everybody wants to pursue those levels of education.
Not necessarily everybody does want to do it.
But you would have to if you go to a job and you're given one of these like slices of work that includes jobs that you need to be educated
for. Presumably, what you can say, I think, is this: you would want the educational system to prepare people to be full participants, creative, capable participants. Not everybody the same, right? In a workplace council, in some workplace. Now, the person is obviously going to gravitate toward one thing or another. Let's say the person is a musician, or for that matter, a ball player, or whatever it is, right? They probably are going to be quite happy to learn their skill and their approach and the knowledge that's associated with it, and to also be made a well-rounded person who knows how to get along with other people and can do other kinds of tasks that don't require a long time to learn. And that's what would happen.
Okay. I mean, I think we disagree on the feasibility of this, but maybe we could move on from here. I don't think we're going to come to an agreement.
But why is it infeasible?
I don't think it's real.
One reason people would say it is infeasible.
Sure. Well, I can give you my reason why I think it's infeasible. I just don't think that we can organize an education system and all of these I don't want to say job markets, but these corporations where every single person can feasibly learn a lot of these like high level jobs, and then people that can.
Nobody suggested that.
Okay, that even us. Okay, I don't think it's possible that the 20% could cut their labor in half, and that the shortfalls created by that could be picked up by the 80% in a way that consumers would be happy with. So, for instance, if I went to a hospital and my child was sick, I don't want somebody that normally cleans the floors who is now doing surgery. And
60 years ago, you would have said, "I don't want a woman," or "I don't want a black." And what I'm saying,
but 60 years ago, that would have been true too, because blacks and women didn't have doctor training.
Yeah, but you didn't. Well, look, nobody is saying you want somebody who is not yet a doctor, right? But you would have said, "I can't conceive of a woman getting training and becoming a doctor, of a black getting training and becoming."
And right now, I can't conceive of that whole 80% of people somehow accessing and completing enough education to pick up the shortfalls from the 20% right
Really?
now. Maybe it's
Well-
possible, but like, and if I wanted to do that, my goal would be to change the education system. I wouldn't change like the economic organization like you were, but
Well,
I'm not
but
sure 100% if that even would be
Suppose
possible.
you did try and change the education system and you didn't change the economy. What would happen?
Well, that's a really broad question. What do you mean? What would happen? Like,
Well, in 1969, the
Okay.
government, after the turmoil of the 60s, the government set up something called the Carnegie Commission
okay,
to investigate. And what they wanted to determine was what the fuck happened.
okay,
Why did this gigantic turmoil happen so that we can prevent it from ever happening again? This is the government and elites, right? And Carnegie Commission, corporate elites setting up this commission to investigate it. And it was quite interesting because they actually came up with what they thought was an answer, which I think it wasn't the only answer, but they were right about it. And what they said was we were overeducating the population. Because of Sputnik, I don't know how much, but there was a big turmoil at the time around education, and all of a sudden there was an enlargement of public education and of the quality of education and the breadth of education and so on. And what they said was the problem was that people were getting out of high school and they expected to have a life. They expected to have some say in their circumstances, and they encountered a world in which they realized they weren't going to have that, and so they went ballistic. And there was a lot of truth to that.
okay. I mean,
Now
I guess maybe.
their lesson from that, just let me just
Sure.
finish this for a second. Their lesson from that was we have to stop what we were doing. We have to cut back education. We have to create more vocational schools, which are loud and noisy and huge rooms full of people to prepare people for work in a corporation. We have to low-level work in a corporation. We have to cut funds to high schools. We have to segment people in high schools so we can be sure that a lot of people are coming out prepared to be essentially wage slaves, prepared to be filling working class jobs. Now, what you're pointing out to me is, Michael, you have the opposite problem. You have to get a mesh between education and the economy. They wanted the mesh to be that the educational system produced people ready to obey orders and endure boredom. You have to educate people who are ready to participate and to make decisions and to take responsibility.
So I guess
And
like
you're right, I do.
So the two things that I would look at, and I don't know if I'm appealing some fundamental appeal to human nature or something, or but like the two things that I would work at empirically that, well, one I know is true, one I think is true. The first one, it seems like college students typically like to specialize, like, or this is very anecdotal from my personal experience, but like people that are, for instance, like science, technology, engineering, math majors. These are people that enjoy specializing in their major classes. They hate electives. They hate that they have to take some
I agree
English
with you.
class or journalist class, right? So already at like the education level, people don't even want to diversify there. And talking to other educated people, so like I have friends that are systems engineers or friends that are project leads, people that work at their particular job. So for instance, if you ask any engineer, any computer programmer, if you say, listen, I've got a really exciting thing for you, I'm going to promote you tomorrow to be like a manager, all of them would hate it. They don't want to do that. They don't want to be more empowered as a manager or whatever. They just want to work on like their computer programming. That's what their desire is. They don't want to be more diversified in terms of what they do. They have their thing, they like it, and that's it. Like I know that these two things, I'm confident in saying that these are generally true. Another thing that I know that makes me wonder on an empirical level for this, because obviously if I grant you that all of this is achievable and we don't lose any like efficiency gains, or if we don't lose a bunch of efficiency or whatever, then your world, it sounds pretty good. But I know, for instance, after NAFTA occurred, I believe the Clinton administration set up like a commission to kind of analyze like what happens when we try to retrain people for jobs. It's a big question that a lot of globalists have no good answers for, which is when people lose jobs in your country because you send work overseas or to other countries, what do you do with those people? Sure, your consumers get cheaper prices, but a lot of people lose work. Well, if we spend money to retrain them, what does that look like? Now, as far as I'm aware, at this level, the empirical data shows that retraining people is a huge waste of money. You're better off just giving them the money verbatim. Once you reach like 40, 50 years old, you're not going to retrain to be an engineer or a computer programmer. Like, people like to specialize in their labor. Now, that's just a general takeaway that I seem to have from those two little bits of information. I'm sure I can think of more, but it seems like when people do like types of work, they like to specialize, they like to have their thing, and then they do it, and that's it. And that trying to diversify the whole workforce seems like a fantastical idea.
But you keep having in your mind, I think, this image of employees being, very broad, doing these huge array of things. I'm not suggesting anything like that. I'm suggesting that they're doing a mix, but that doesn't mean it's a mix of 100 different things. It means there's one thing that they maybe specialize in. Not everybody does, but I agree with you. Lots of people would. They might specialize in writing songs. They might specialize in science. They might specialize, whatever it is. I agree with you. So that's the thing that they get their dignity and fulfillment from in the empowered sense. And then the rest, why do they do the rest? Well, they do the rest because it generates a society which is equitable. It generates a society in which you don't have these class struggle and class hierarchy. It generates a society in which you don't have, like in the United States right now, working class communities that are devastated, and which, they're just devastated. Most people don't realize how bad this situation is. That's part of what's created the Trump phenomenon. So you opt for, I mean, why do people opt to change society so there's less and hopefully no racism, or less and hopefully no sexism? They do it partly because they believe it's right, partly because it will help everybody to free up and utilize those capabilities and talents from those people, and partly to eliminate the tremendous tension and hostility that exists between these constituencies that have differential amounts of well-being and resources and everything else. That's why you would work to get rid of class division also.
Okay. And then I'm guessing that for these 20% of people that probably wouldn't want to differentiate their work or whatever, you would just vote them out basically, and they would be forced to kind of.
Well, if you look at now, right? In other words, you face an economy which has certain attributes.
Okay.
And by and large, you don't question those. You rather choose a spot in there that you're going to aim for.
Okay.
Right? Okay. Well, that's what would happen in a participatory economy. There would no longer be non-balanced jobs.
Well, in a participatory economy, though, your best types of jobs are never going to be as good as the best types of jobs in this economy. So, for instance, if I wanted to be a doctor full time, I no longer have the option to do that.
That's correct.
There are other questions about
That's correct. So 20% of the workforce, right, doesn't get to have optimal circumstances, while 80% of the workforce has subordinate circumstances.
Sure. Do you ever worry that
produce a degree of equity?
Do you ever worry that degree of equity that's being created there might preclude you from some people being able to pursue things full times, to pioneer things in fields or whatever? Or would you say that
Einstein being?
Or would you just say the other 80% would make these same discoveries or whatever?
There's two things. There's two things I would say. First of all, there's a lot of mythology again. So Einstein was working as a rote patent office clerk when he did all of his big stuff, or most of his big stuff. And when he was a full-time physicist later, he did nothing comparable. So there's a lot of variables that affect things like that.
But you don't think maybe Einstein could have made more progress even if he...
Let's say you're right. I don't think so. I think that the 80% would liberate far more creative potential, productive capacity than we would lose from the 20%. But let's say we would lose some. Okay, let's say we would lose some. What do we gain? We gain equity. We gain an end to all of the class struggle and class conflict. We gain the hatred that exists, and it's real, between working class people in that 80% and the 20%. I first encountered this when I taught in a prison, and I was teaching in the prison, and most of the people, partly it was black-white. There was a lot of that. There were, hostility, but almost everybody was working class in their background. And I was teaching about the system we live under, and I was teaching about capitalism and about owners and stuff. And I was struck, I was much younger, and I was struck by the fact that there was no anger. That when I would talk about somebody who owned a workplace and was worth, $100 million or $300 million, nobody got very excited, right? And then later, I would talk about doctors and lawyers and engineers, and all of a sudden there was all this passion in the room and all this anger at people who treated them like they were dirt and like they were fools and like they had no efficacy. And I thought about it for a while, and I realized that most working class people never come into contact with the 1%. They never are dissed directly, personally, by the 1%, but they have a whole lot of experience with the 20% all the time. And not only that, they not only have this class antagonism toward them, for good reason, I think, but it's structural. I'm not saying the people are bad people, the 20%. It's structural. But they not only have this antagonism toward them, but they want their kids to become them. That's the plight of a working class person in the United States oftentimes. They hate the doctor, they hate the engineer, they hate the manager, and they pray that their kid will be able to get into college and go and become one.
So to be clear, this is just to be super clear. This is like a very good story and like a very compelling narrative. But like if we actually think about like what's going on, right? Like a working class person doesn't hate the job of doctor, the job of lawyer, whatever. They maybe have had some bad run-ins with them that make them feel like those people are assholes, but they don't want their kid to become like somebody that they're going to hate. They just want their kid to become somebody that's wealthy, that has like a level of economic freedom.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they're far more sophisticated, and they understand that the person who they don't like and the experiences that they've had. I had one person describe it to me this way. They said, you know how when we walk down the street, it was a black guy, when I walk down the street at night and there's a white person walking the other direction, the assumption is that I'll step aside. That's just the assumption. This is 50, 60 years ago, right? The assumption is that this person doesn't have to change where they work, but that I'll step aside. And he said, what you don't realize is that when I walk down the street and the person coming in the other direction is, now he didn't use the term coordinator class, but I would use the term coordinator class, right? But a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a manager, same dynamic. If it's white on white, still the same dynamic. And how do they know who's who? By the way they dress, by the way they carry themselves, all sorts of things give it away. And what he said was, this guy had thought about it more. It's not that the person is a schmuck. I've met schmucky working class people. It's that the whole sector of people, by virtue of what they do and how they view us as people to care for, like you would care for kids. They view us as people who are commodities, who are clients, but they don't view us as people. They don't, and that had a big effect on me in those days. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, what is it at bottom that causes this distinction and that causes people to view each other in these ways, where the working class person is sort of angry toward the elite. This is sort of populism, you could call it. And the coordinator class person is sort of disdainful.
What do you think? What do you think causes it? Why do you think people view?
I think what causes it is that that's what their role in society requires of them to succeed and to function well. It's right. You can even see it on TV. I mean, I would not write TV scripts, but you can see it all over television.
I feel like I would post something a lot different here for the way that I view this. I feel like and you could argue this goes hand in hand in capitalism. I might not disagree with you. So I feel like a lot of this is fueled actually by consumerism. The way that we identify people and the way that we assign worth to not only to other people, but even to ourselves is if we've acquired the possessions that make us stand out in the way that society tells us it should. So, for instance, we buy a certain pair of shoes, a certain type of clothing, not because we like it, but because society tells us that if we have that, we're worth more. So when you talk about like identifying people on the street, insofar as I move aside for you, you move aside for me, you're better than me, I'm better than you, I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with jobs or division of coordinators.
Except what lets people buy that stuff? Income. And the income that people have is a function of their position, of their class
I
position.
just think that the analysis of a person on the street is far less sophisticated than any sort of understanding of like a class thing. It's more like a product or consumerist thing. It's not. It's kind of tied into jobs, but not really. But kind of.
No, it's very tied into jobs because the coordinator class makes way more than the working class, and so the coordinator class owns those things. I mean, what you're describing is true. I'm not going to disagree with you about that. And in fact, everybody knows it, especially the advertisers. So when you want to sell a product, it's rare. It's not unknown, right? But most of the time, what you're saying is this product will deliver status. This product will deliver freedom. This product will deliver sex. This product will get you a girlfriend or a boyfriend. This product will deliver what's missing in your life. Right? Which tells us something about our lives. I mean, just watch 100 ads in a row and you'll discover something about life in America. What it is that people crave and don't have. And then they try and get it by buying this crap that doesn't and never intended to fill those needs, because you don't want to fill those needs. You want people to keep buying. It's a sidebar, but it's part of the whole system. I agree with you. I mean, the system that we live under, it's not. Imagine you were put in jail tomorrow, right? All right, so you're in prison, and imagine the prison has a commissary, a
place where you go and buy products, basically.
Okay, so you go in, and it's your first day in jail, and you get to go to the commissary, and you look around, and everything is crap, and you don't want anything, right? So you're pissed off and you go back to your cell, right? A week later, you go in. Maybe you still are that way. A month later, you go in. You're no longer that way. Now you see these array of stuff in the commissary, and you want some more than you want others. Why? Because it's all that's available. And so your taste, and if you want to be depressed all the time, you keep wanting what's available outside the prison, right? Some people probably do that. But if you're sensible, you sort of remold your tastes a little bit so you can get some pleasure out of the crap in the commissary. Now, I actually think that that's what everybody is doing all the time in the United States.
Ben, you're still muted.
All right, that was my fault. I did not mean to pause it there, but it is probably not a bad time. I'd said that we were going to wait until we got through the job complexes, specialization stuff to pause again, but they've been on balanced job complexes and specialization for a long time. So it might not be a terrible place to stop to talk a little bit anyway. So I think, I'll be interested to hear what you guys think. I guess, so there was a thing that came up in passing about retraining laid off workers that I think is worth touching on. But on the main subject, which is that part of participatory economics, as Albert sees it, is having everybody having balanced job complexes. I mean, I like Albert. I've interviewed Albert. I think he's an interesting guy. I'm teaching a class at his online school, social and cultural change, in April and May. But I do think that at least tactically, he's making a mistake here above and beyond the substantive criticisms of his views that we talked about earlier, because I get it, right? I mean, I think the first time I ever did one of these things, or almost the first time, I'd done like a couple of random debates with people, some guy with a YouTube channel with 100 viewers or something. But just for the first time I did one of these things 2 years ago, I was on Dave Smith's show, Part of the Problem. And I think on there, I kind of did what Albert is doing here, which is just being like way, way too professory about it. And I, there's some value in this kind of format to getting to the point and arguing for things in a more straightforward way. So that said, I think Destiny is also misunderstanding a lot of what he's saying, and a lot of the, the sort of ways he's trying to push back, miss some important points. So as I understand it, right, Albert's not saying that you're not going to have specialization. He's not saying everybody's going to do everything. He's not even saying, right, and this seems to be the point that Destiny was getting at with the stuff about people taking classes in their majors versus electives, that everybody has to train in multiple specializations. As I understand it, what he's saying is that nobody can have a job where all they do is the skilled thing that they're trained for. So you can't have a job, if you're a doctor, right? If you trained as a doctor, you can't have a job where all you do is perform, medical tasks for 8 hours a day, which, as we discussed last time, is not actually what doctors do anyway. But pretending that it was, right, that they didn't spend hours a day doing paperwork, that you couldn't be a doctor and just do that. You'd have to be a doctor and also spend a certain portion of your day doing unskilled tasks. So it's not like you would have had to take, extra classes in college so you learn how to change bedpans. Presumably on the job training would be fine for that. It's just that you would be doing both of those things, so that the more skilled or empowering, in Albert's terminology, work would be spread around more, and everybody would be doing at least some unskilled labor. And there's a lot of talk here, like the doctor example. I don't know. Maybe this is a good time to throw to you guys.
Rob, do you want to go first? I do have something I want to say, but I want to.
I have sort of two reactions. Yeah, and the very first thing I want to say is, I'm about to criticize Albert a bunch, and I think we all are here. So just to say, like, Albert's done a lot of cool work before parecon, which we should add. Parecon was developed with Robin Hennell, the great leftist economist. We should mention him again. Really great economist with a lot of good books. And Albert himself has a couple of really nice ones here. He has this giant memoir he wrote. I don't really like memoirs usually. This is just his memoirs from running Z Magazine and South End Press, the publisher he talked about. I got to say, there's a lot of juicy, interesting stuff in there. So I don't want to just completely trash the man. And like Ben was saying, the man's still running, an online school, and Z Magazine itself, which I just discovered apparently is no longer a print mag. Sad to say, it's fully online now.
Oh, man, I used to have a print subscription to Z Magazine way back when.
Me too, yeah. I wrote a lot for Z Magazine a few years ago, so a lot of respect for that. Folks should check out the ZNet page, which is still extant, of course. It's very cool. But yeah, like Ben said, this is a pretty, what I was saying to the other guys here in the chat was, this is more of like a professory approach. This is like, and now what do you think about this? And what's your, there's a little bit long on Socratic dialogue and a little bit less of YouTube owning. Is a diagnosis you could perhaps make. And again, that's kind of a gross thing, but again, we talked about this last time and it's come up on the show frequently. It is a debate. It's stupid as it is, it's partially showbiz. You kind of need to be fun and get your zingers in and not go on forever, because you'll lose people. People will stop paying attention. They'll get bored. There is something to consider there. I mean, that's an obvious thing perhaps, but also the other thing I'd say is, like we got to earlier, like the issue of specialization and balancing work just based on the work you do. I mean, there's a real truth in parecon, which is, when you have power as a doctor or an attorney or an engineer or an academic, like the tendency is for you to have that job, and other people clean out the trash and do the more menial or often blue collar jobs that are associated with it. But there are other ways of bringing in justice into that work environment. Last week, Brenton brought up the perhaps more workable and more easily accepted idea where if you have a shittier job, you get more time off, or you get to go to the socialized beach houses that we have, or that we took away from Michael Bloomberg because he goes to them twice a year. There are just lots of other fun ways that you can balance out drudgery in jobs that tend not to have the ability for fulfillment that a lot of professional class jobs have, sort of. Besides having everyone, do the menial work and the fun, interesting, engrossing work in their own workplace. So I just wanted to refer to that and remind people to check out ZNet.
Fair enough.
It was really funny because I'm sitting there, and this I think is showing you guys are a bit older than I am, but I'm thinking, I'm like, Z Magazine, I don't really remember that. And then you're like, ZNet, I'm like, oh, Occupy. Yeah, now I remember it. So it shows, I think you guys are a few years older than me, but I remember ZNet very well from Occupy Wall Street. So I think the problem here, and the reason I think he and Destiny are talking past each other, and they somehow eventually came around to it, is Albert is not clarifying that some portion of that 80% is being trained as doctors. He does not come out explicitly and clarify that until much later, when Destiny throws out some of his objections to that. And there were some interesting things in there, because I do think he is right in the sense that there are certain people that don't adapt well to higher education for one reason or another, and what do you do with those folks, which is a important question to ask.
No, I thought that was, like, for the most part, I thought that Destiny was not objecting well to what Albert was saying, but I thought that was a completely fair thing, right? I mean, like, that there are people who are not, like, there are plenty of people who don't finish school because circumstances that reflect injustice and economic inequality, of course. But there are also people who don't finish school just because they decide that it's not for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to live in a society where, like, I'm much more concerned with having a society where you have, good life outcomes if school is not for you, than figuring out how to make those people finish school.
Absolutely. What I feel like Albert is talking around here, and it's something that came up in our recent debate on socialism and innovation, and I think this is a tacit assumption at the base of the debate. So what Albert seems to be very concerned about is the Stephen Jay Gould quote, I am somewhat less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops. And it seems that the tacit assumption on Destiny's side is, again, that people who are talented enough to do these top tier jobs are very rare and difficult. That brilliance is hard to find, and the task of society and of our economic system is to find this very small amount of brilliant people and move them into that 20%. And I'll say from life experience, it's just not the case. I think genius is very, very common. The problem is that people have difficulty recognizing it when it doesn't come wrapped in exactly the package that they want it to be wrapped in. So I thought that Albert made a great point when he was talking about, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, when people are not looking at women and people of color and non-white men and they can't conceive that these people could possibly be doctors or fulfill any of these tasks. And Destiny, ironically, seems to be a little inconsistent here, because he seemed to, if I'm not mistaken, agree with what Albert was saying, that was wrong in the past, but then also says he can't conceive of today, the same thing, he can't see the same bias that he sees in the past in himself right now. And it was really weird. I mean, I almost am like, am I just completely misunderstanding what he's saying there? Or is he not putting two and two together and realizing what Albert was trying to lead him to was that, you know, they didn't believe that women and people of color could do these jobs back then, and they couldn't conceive it. And now today, you can't conceive that 80% of these people, many of them, the vast majority, could be trained to do the 20% jobs. And he seemed to, you know, just continue on with like, yeah, I can't conceive that. And I'm sure he had like a reason, because he was going into specifics that he then got cut off from. But I think right there is kind of the core issue: is do people believe that the current status that we have, the 80-20% whatever, is that it is actually a meritocracy, and people are pulled up, and put into those positions simply because they're the only ones who can do them? Or do we have this surfeit of talent that is being stifled by the rest of society by various economic and political barriers? I would say it's the second one. And I think that that's the core of what Albert is getting at, but he's talking around it because he wants to bring Destiny to it, to get Destiny to say it himself. And in a debate, it's usually not a good idea to try to get your debate partner to figure out what you're trying to say on their own, if that makes sense.
No, for sure. I mean, like, I think if you're on Destiny's side of the conversation, like, you're not gonna, just the fact that you're bringing on somebody to have a conversation with who you don't quite agree, you have some disagreements about this stuff. I mean, that's what it's about. Means that it's very unlikely that in that context he's going to be brought around like in the moment, and again, it's and this also just ties into what Rob is saying about getting to the point. A lot of the stuff about how doctors are want to have basically what he's talking about was sort of like guild thinking, trying to make the barriers to entry really high in order to increase their bargaining power for higher salaries and everything. There may well be a lot of truth to that, and I did take his example about residencies and stuff where people are being absurdly overworked and in ways that might actually be dangerous for patients. And if you had maybe if you were training twice as many doctors, you wouldn't have that problem. But also, that was 15 minutes on the could we train more people to be doctors stuff that was very circuitous. There was a lot of sort of appealing to these intuitions about these analogies with previous historical situations. And it just seems like there's a pretty straightforward 30-second way of arguing for we could train way more people to be doctors, which is to say, hey, the rate of doctors per capita varies wildly from country to country right now. There are countries in the world with way more doctors per capita than the U.S. has. Americans probably aren't uniquely stupid. I'll bet we could train more people to be doctors if we wanted to.
Yeah. And, I really feel like he touched on something really great that I wish I'd seen him pull into more, which is the overeducation point. I mean, really, I wasn't aware of that particular historical example of overeducation, but I mean, you think about the millennial generation, that's what we're dealing with, very specifically, is we're the most educated generation in American history, thanks in large part to, very easy to get into, mostly predatory student loans. But you've got all of these people who are really, really well educated, who are able to sit down and think about the world, and they come into, the 2008 economy. And things haven't really improved that much from there. So that does definitely lead to a lot of social dysfunction when you have people who are educated to do better jobs, and you have an economy that it has a large portion of people doing jobs that are mind-numbing and not fulfilling and don't pay very well. And I think in a lot of ways that, if liberal capitalism could find some way to deal with this problem, it might endure longer, and it has proven to be a very adaptable system. But the fact is, I'm highly skeptical of its ability to deal with this problem because it's been over a decade and it still hasn't dealt with the problem.
Yeah, that kind of takes us to the retraining stuff, which I wanted to make sure I touched on, because that is a place where I thought, that all this back and forth about balanced job complexes, I don't know. I think it's probably a good idea to train more doctors anyway, even if we're not going to go the parecon route. And again, Cuba does manage to train like 3 times as many doctors per 1,000 people as we do. So I don't think there's anything impossible about that. It'd be good to have a better doctor-patient ratio anyway. So I guess I'm on Albert's side of that, although it's also, and I think Destiny was misunderstanding part of the point there. Right? It's not that there are tons of people who have already could become doctors in a year or whatever. It's just that if we had we trained, there was a broader swathe of the population for which we recruited, the pool of potential doctors. We could have more doctors.
We didn't have doctors, for instance, potential doctors spending their life in a coal mine.
Right. Yeah, totally. Right. And I think it's very implausible that that's not you don't even have to think that I'm inclined to think you probably maybe not certain specializations or whatever that even most doctors can't do. But, I'm inclined to think that probably, more people than not actually could do that if that's what they were, told to do in life. But even if you believe that for the sake of argument, only, whatever, a very small percentage of the population could be, have what it takes, to be trained as a doctor, which I don't believe. But even if you do believe that, okay, whatever. What percentage of the population we're talking about? I'll bet it's many times as many people as currently trained to be doctors, and it's almost certainly distributed throughout lots of parts of the population where people it never occurs to them to try to study to be doctors just because of their background, the challenge they face, they just don't think that's a realistic life path. But whenever you think about all that stuff, the retraining example is really weird. Because, one, I don't think anything that Albert's saying is actually really about retraining. I think everything that he's saying, you could just say with the next generation of 18-year-olds to be trained. Nobody has to be retrained in their 40s, for this to work, assuming that we're willing to have a relatively slow transition to parecon. But also, Destiny's empirical claim here sounds a little dodgy to me. That people past failures of attempts to retrain laid off coal miners or whatever shows that people can't be retrained at this age. Because at the very least, there are some pretty obvious alternative explanations for some of this data lying around. Is it so much that people who just can't pick up computer programming, right, that they literally couldn't do the job, as that they rationally are not excited about trying to compete with 22-year-olds, for the few jobs that are available doing this?
Yeah. It's the whole teach people coding to get them out of poverty. This is interesting because Albert did touch on this a little bit. And it's the whole, what I think a lot of people don't realize about our economy, and Rob, you can weigh in on this if I'm correct or completely off base. But it seems to me that, salaries for the most part, except for stuff like minimum wage and bargaining for, they're set by the laws of supply and demand. So, the Democrats' big thing with when they were stealing their slogan from Papa John's with, hey, pizza came up again. Better training, better jobs or something, when they were really pushing that, that's the idea, we go and we train everyone that works at McDonald's.
It's
what was the slogan?
I said it's just amazing that Papa John's has the gall to have that slogan. It's like cardboard with some pizza sauce and cheese sprinkled over it.
I will agree. As a New Yorker, it is. But when the Democrats unveiled that slogan, like the first thing that I noticed about it was, wait a minute. If you went and you took everybody that worked at McDonald's and you trained them to code and they all became coders.
Right. Supply
coders for McDonald's.
It wouldn't increase the supply of coding jobs. What it would is it would tank the bargaining power that you get on the labor market, to command higher wages because you have this skill. You just make the skill, worthless. So before you know it, coding would pay as little as McDonald's would.
Yeah. So it's essentially workers when it comes to workers and education on an individual basis, education can be a way out, but it cannot be a way out for society across the board. And so I felt like that was really interesting. From a rhetorical standpoint, by the way, with regard to the AMA doing that on purpose, I'm going to say my dad's a doc. I've never heard of anything like that. I don't think that's what the AMA does, at all. I can see that maybe that because it is something that happens, like the smaller supply of doctors, the more money you're going to have. And I can see that happening. But the way that Alpert put forth, it almost sounded like he was putting forth a conspiracy theory. And you have to be very, very careful with that in a debate, even if you're right, because as we saw with the pizza thing with Destiny, people will assume that you are saying, they hear what they want to hear, and they will assume that you're saying something.
I think that's right. I don't know how much or little truth there is to the AMA thing. I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt on that, but I agree that it's a bad look because it certainly sounds conspiratorial. And again, there's no reason you even have to go there, right? Because it's his argument, his larger argument did not whatsoever hinge on the AMA claim. He could have just said, look, medical school could be just as long. That's fine. We'll just send more people through it. Or he even could have simplified the entire issue and said, hey, Cuba manages to train way more than twice as many doctors, per 1,000 people than the United States does. I don't think that Cubans are just inherently smarter people than Americans.
Absolutely. Rob, you look like you had something there.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm thinking about what you guys are saying. Yeah, with the AMA piece, that's such an unforced error. I mean, not even to say it's wrong. That's more of a traditional right-wing argument than left-wing one. But there is something to be said that the various professional licensing standards that exist in the U.S. and around the world, if you pick up Milton Friedman and stuff, which I have done mistakenly in the past, there's a big argument that the reason doctors and engineers and accountants and professors are so expensive is because there's licensing, not for academics, but for those other fields, you have to get a license. You can't just have your doctoral degree. You have to pass a bar or a board exam or some other godforsaken state administered standard. And there is a guild aspect to that. Attorneys are happy to make it harder for you to get a license to practice law in their state when you move to it or get your degree, just for those straight, supply and demand labor market reasons. On the other hand, though, any sensible liberal, let alone leftist, will say, yeah, but also licensure also lets you know that you're getting a doctor who definitely went to medical school, who can answer basic questions. No one wants a half-price brain surgeon. I think a lot of us are willing to pay a little bit more for the guy who builds the bridge into their town, or the doctor who operates on their kid who had a car accident. You're willing to pay a little bit more for not having to do the due diligence standing in some hospital emergency room. But is he a good doctor? I mean, does he really have a license? Again, when conservatives argue against this sort of stuff, you just want to think well, how did it used to be before that was required? And back in the day, you had every kind of hilarious fraud and literal snake oil being sold before we had things like the FDA and licensing standards and stuff. So it's kind of an interesting area.
Water. Yeah, people selling colored water, or the proto Donald Trump was that one doctor who was half Donald Trump, half Alex Jones, and his big procedure was sewing goat testicles into people to help with ED. And that man nearly became,
another great idea that big government has taken from us. That's great.
He nearly became governor, by the way. The Republicans and the Democrats had to combine to stop this insane doctor from getting in.
Yeah.
That is our.
Yes, this is actually true. Rand Paul, I don't even remember what he's supposed to be a doctor of, but he actually started his own alternative certification board instead of taking the standard certification. That's a real thing that happened.
That's such a worthwhile thing. But I was just bringing this up because you guys are right. Like, this is, again, it's like other things that Albert has spent a lot of time talking about in this debate. Like, this isn't really like directly essential for this subject. It's padding out the runtime of this debate. It's making people more bummed out, making them think about subjects, which again are interesting. Like I would say, like licensure, like, yeah, there is a guild aspect to it. I don't really think you can dodge that, but licensing like does give you a floor of care for areas that are too complex for you to find out about them yourself. Like, you can look up reviews for a car mechanic, but it's tougher when it's like, pediatric surgeons. That's a different thing, So I thought that was interesting. But getting to the training issue just briefly, which again need not have ever come up. If we're saying that, now doctors spend a fifth of their hours, doing relatively menial work at the hospital or a clinic space, that doesn't, that means over time you need an increase in the number of people trained to be doctors for a given economy. And that's not a huge issue. My experience, and, I teach at a community college. I used to work in the Midwest where we have a lot of big industrial job losses. There are a lot of people who are, in their 40s or 50s, and they're laid off from the shop or from some manufacturing situation, and they're going back into education at some 2 or 4 year school to then go get technical education to write software or do one of these other fast growing technical jobs. Some people are up for it, and you do also have a lot of people who are look at this and like who just don't even want to have to go back to like high school era math in a community college at 55, so they can begin the long process of spending 8 years to get a degree and then entering some new job where they're at the bottom of the pay scale again. In my experience, a lot of people do look at that and think, all right, well, I'll pick up a part-time job until I can get on Social Security, or they take an early retirement with just a lowered economic expectation of what their retired standard of living will be, which is a very common American activity. Like, like that's a real issue. I mean, Destiny's not bringing up any evidence of this, but it is like a good point about Carson there. There is a limit to what you can do with trade.
Despite clearly being a lunatic, Ben Carson actually does seem to be a good doctor.
Is he like a neurosurgeon? He's like a
like he's literally a brain surgeon.
Yeah.
Just like he's single-handedly taken away the utility of the phrase, it's not exactly brain surgery.
Yeah. It was nice when we could say that. That's a bygone era. Yeah.
Yeah, now it's like, oh no, you could be a brain surgeon and just this like babbling, like, Facebook ant, it's like, oh, I think that the pyramids were actually grain storage, and when Jesus came back, so anyway, footnote. But yes, I take your point about the the licensing, that it's certainly not something you want to overemphasize, because even if there is some truth to the Milton Friedman sort of argument there, varying in different cases, like I'm a lot more willing to believe that you can, like the sort of licensing that you need in some states to, have a hair salon, like I'm a lot more willing to believe that that we might be able to do without that, than, that we should remove licensure requirements for surgeons and pilots.
That's a great point too. Yeah, but just to me, the real lesson of this is like, folks watching this, when you're arguing with your friends, or certainly if you're in a public debate, like, don't be like an academician where you have all the time in the world and it's, let's talk about that principle. Let's establish this principle. Now we've established 900 principles, and just push it over in my argument stance. Like, it's, you got to take your argument to your debating buddy, and like, you don't have time to lay out every damn thing. Do that in an essay. This is, this, you got to be on point. I mean, you could be listening to this and completely have lost track of what they're arguing about.
No, exactly. Like, especially somebody could just be dropping in on this video at any point in the conversation. It's like, oh, Destiny's streaming right now. Wonder what they're talking about. And like 2 minutes into this, you're like, okay, never mind. So yeah, I agree. Brent, you want to throw?
Yeah, there was something that I wanted to bring up, and it was actually a point of agreement between the two of them that I have a hardcore disagreement with. And it's the idea that the 20% of jobs are going to be worse for having to work in some of the work from the 80% of jobs. And, again, my dad is a doctor, and I've seen how he relates to his work and to this. And that's usually the example they use. So I can't help but put it in those terms. Yeah, my dad's a doctor, but like, honestly, I also get the sense that he just really wanted to manage like a mom and pop grocery store. Like, and also the idea that with these like high stress, high prestige jobs like a lawyer or a doctor, that it wouldn't actually be a welcome break to do some other form of task, that the doctor, you know, spends a lot of his time doctoring and away from the paperwork, and hopefully somebody else takes care of that. And then they spend some of their time cutting the grass outside the hospital. I know a ton of doctors who would love to do that, because that's what they do on the weekends. They go home and they get on their ride-on mower and cut the grass. So like, I there's an aspect of Zen to some of the less prestigious jobs. And I actually think that a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think to a certain extent, to break up these work and to make them slightly less hyper-specialized might help out everybody, as opposed to being sort of a cost-benefit analysis that I'm getting out of Destiny and Michael.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, of course, it depends on what the what the non skilled tasks in the balanced job complex are, and also just the personality of the doctor. But I think there's probably some truth to that. Let's watch a little bit more.
We are remolding our preferences to get pleasure out of
Might be having a tech issue here, folks. Be just a second.
Rob, are you there?
Yeah, can you see me, Matt?
I can see you. Can you see me?
I can. I can't see Ben. I think he might be fiddling on his end with the technology. I think we should improvise a series of rude jokes to maintain people's attention until Ben gets back. Absolutely.
Bonus points if they stray into the non-politically correct sector.
Yes, that's this is I've been inspired by watching this stream, and now I want to be more of an edgy streaming figure and punch down at socially vulnerable groups in order to gain more social media attention. That's just a feeling I'm having. I just want to share it.
Yeah, it's definitely a feeling, and you and I shall take that into the new country of Cancelvania, where everyone is problematic and everyone is canceled all the time.
I don't want to go there. Oh.
Yeah, no one wants to go there. Here's my question for you. While we're waiting on Ben, assuming we're not like interrupting the stream, and if
I hope we're ruining it, and he's trying to reach us and tell us to stop.
So you were talking earlier about economics and being less scientific than other soft sciences, and definitely the hard sciences. Now, one of the guy who actually convinced me to become an anarchist is a econ PhD. And one of the things that he told me was that there is a field called behavioral economics that has been making like workable, testable laboratory models for years. Are you familiar with behavioral economics, and do you have the same feelings about that field, or is that was he maybe getting too excited about it?
It's interesting. Like, it's one of those. It's one of the areas of economics which again has a big field with a lot of like really, really different approaches and conclusions than how it's portrayed when everyone calls it a science. Yeah, it's one of those pieces that like at least is like taking a sort of empirical, like a sort of data gathering based approach In my experience, it's kind of more constrained in what it looks at. It tends to be more like what specific things can get a consumer to do something. Like, can we nudge people to making consumer decisions and stuff? It's all part of the weird world of economics, which you can learn more about in a book.
Excellent. Are we ready to go, Ben?
Yeah. Sorry. That was very unintentional. But let me see if we can get back to where we were. So I was trying to listen on my AirPods, which was a mistake, because that cut it off from the main thing. So let's go. All right, tell me if this is before or after where we cut off.
Delivers X sort of cheaper than its real cost and Y more expensive than its real cost. So we change.
Was that after we cut off or before? Can you tell?
I was getting crazy reverb. Was anybody else getting that?
I think that's just because we weren't muted in that very first moment. It sounded good after we muted ourselves. I think this is right about at that point, Ben. I think we'd be okay if we went from here.
Okay, sorry about that.
Change. Well, a market system is biased against dealing with the ecology. It is biased against providing collective goods. It is biased toward individual production and individual consumption. And we change our taste to fit that bias. Otherwise, we're miserable. So we make ourselves over time want stuff that's available. Balanced jobs aren't available. None of us want them. None of us think about them. It's nowhere near our consciousness, right? As you described.
So real quick, because I know I understand the road that we're down, and like I must agree to some level that whatever society you're born into is going to program you to some extent to prefer that society, that Black people are less than white people, women are less than men, depending on what time period you're from, of course. And it can seem impossible to break free from that system if you're born into it, even though now we have some historical perspective and we can see, well, those people were foolish, right? You're just saying that you're maybe 50 to 100 years ahead, looking back saying, well, we're going to say that like a market economy right now is also a foolish idea that we're constrained to. And that's possible. It could entirely be possible. But the caution that I would say here is just because things have been bad in the past and were replaced by something else doesn't mean, one, that what we have right now is necessarily bad for any given reason, and that two, that your replacement is either possible or remedies the problems given, right? I do agree that it is entirely possible that that even like my brain is so poisoned with neoclassical assumptions or our current like modes of production that I can't see a way out of it. That it is possible, right? I can see that. But even if it is, like the replacement needs to be something that's possible that I could suggest.
I agree.
Yeah, of course.
It's incumbent on me to make that case.
Of course, which is what you're attempting to do. Yeah. Or what you are doing.
Briefly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, briefly. Yeah, of course. To not get so I think I understand how you would dole out jobs. I think we kind of understand this. Do you want to just so that we're not doing this for hours and hours tonight? Do you want to talk a little bit about how goods are doled out to households? I know that like part of participatory economics does that. If you want to move on that, or if there's another part you want to move on to, you can do that.
No, that's fine. That's the hardest part by far to think about. When we were thinking about this, balanced job complexes, they're different, right? But and so in that sense, it's hard, sort of outside the box, but it's not that complicated. And the same thing with equitable remuneration. But allocation is more difficult. I agree. I'm against central planning because it's authoritarian. I'm against central, not because it doesn't work. It can work, and in fact, most people don't realize this, but the economic literature in the United States totally acknowledges the central planning can work. It's for the population that it can't. But I don't like it anyway.
Sure.
Right?
To be clear,
because it gives you authoritarianism and it robs self-management and so on and so forth.
Sure. So just to be clear,
the coordinated class rules the working class.
Yeah.
I don't like markets for a host of reasons.
Sure. Just to be clear, when economists today say that central planning can't work, it's not that central planning
can work.
Yeah, or if they say it can or can't, that the problem isn't generally with central planning. It's the idea that when you try to centrally plan for too many variables, it becomes impossible to do so. So essentially planning at like the population
level. That's exactly what actually economists in the United States have seriously investigated in a way that I wouldn't, because I don't want to make it work. because I don't
Sure.
like it at its best.
Because you
right?
consider authoritarian.
But
Sure. So
because it's authoritarian and it's got class division and so on. But they investigated all sorts of mechanisms to build into the central planning to deal with these so-called information problems. And they feel that they have done a whole lot of that and succeeded in providing incentives to generate information, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because I don't care, right? The best conceivable central planning, which you may feel is impossible, but even if we say it is possible, I don't want it, right?
Sure.
It's
you're
still
ideologically opposed to it. I understand.
or it's not ideologically. I'm opposed to it because it produces a coordinator class, working class division, a hierarchy of wealth, income, power, influence, authoritarianism, which spreads throughout society.
Okay. This seems like a weird thing to push back on. Like that just seems like what ideological means. I don't like it because it conflicts with my ideals. But whatever.
Society, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want any of that. I consider all of that. I mean, if you have to have it, if the alternative is starvation, okay.
Yeah,
But
I'm
if
sorry. I
you
didn't
have a
mean
better
like
system, then we should have a better system.
Yeah, I didn't mean ideologically like in a partisan hackery way. I just meant like ideologically you're opposed to what follows from authoritarianism. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so how would we
Let me give you the extreme. Here's where I'm considered an extremist. I mean, so far people might consider me crazy about some of these things.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I would.
But I think
markets.
I think markets are the single worst, single most destructive artifact of human creation in history. So I'm a market abolitionist. I think markets, by their dynamics, are incredibly harmful. More and more people are beginning to see this as the world faces the possibility of extinction. But I've felt it for a long time. In any case, the real question is, what's the alternative? So the alternative is what's called participatory planning. I should say markets are market planning, right? Every economy winds up with something that's done, and the thing that's done is, in fact, the plan, right? So market plan, you can call it market plan. Now, that doesn't make it anything like central planning. It's nothing. I mean, it's completely different from central planning. In any case, participatory planning is also completely different than central planning.
Okay, sure.
It's basically workers' councils and consumer councils, and consumers as individuals operating in the consumer councils, and workers as individuals operating in the workers' councils, cooperatively negotiating inputs and outputs. That means that the councils make proposals, that the proposals are communicated, that in response to the information that the proposals generate, there are new proposals, and this goes on. Now, in a quick rendition, this is going to sound, yeah, I mean, that would be nice if it was possible. Okay, so I agree with you. We'd have to spend some time to prove it's possible. But that is more than doable. It is possible to show not only that you can coordinate, let's call it, or organize an economy in this fashion, but that you can have incentives within this approach that get the job done, that generate self-management and so on and so forth.
I'm curious, so like how would a household determine what goods or services they need for a year? Like what would that process look like?
Okay. So let's say you and your spouse and kids, whatever it is, household, or maybe it's a bigger household than that. And this also applies to a larger thing like a community, say. You have a record of your last year's activity. Okay. You also have what are called indicative prices. They are the initial prices at the start of the planning period. They're not going to be the final prices, but they are the best.
Let me clarify for the audience also. When you say prices, this is like a relative term. There is no currency in this system. It's just like you're allotted like maybe X units. Right?
You can think of it any way you want. There's almost no currency right now, right? People use credit cards.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
All right. Basically, you have an income.
Sure.
Right, let's do it this way. Your family has an income.
Okay.
And
that, I gotta say, was not a helpful answer.
Yeah, that's a slightly embarrassing moment there. Yeah, like, oh, there are no using plastic rather than cash. Like, you're still paying prices and thinking of relative prices and planning your weekly consumption. That was just, I guess, a strange choice.
And you notice Destiny didn't even push back. He just kind of smiled because he knew he didn't have to push back on that.
That's I will put that one in Destiny's column for sure. Hey, we got to call him as we see him, guys.
Yeah. Fair enough. And it just seems like obviously. I didn't understand. They know it's not ideological. It's because it produces these results I don't like. That's what seems like. When you talk about. You're ideologically opposed. I think the standard interpretation of that is it conflicts with my normative preferences. Maybe Michael Albert was trying to make the point that the normative preferences there can be understood in consequentialist terms, more like what Destiny thinks. But even if so, I think that was a slightly weird way to say it. And the currency thing seemed like a real, that's just not an answer. Obviously what Destiny meant when he asked that question wasn't would people be using paper currency or writing checks or swiping credit cards. Obviously what he meant is would they be using money, right? That's the question, right? Are we just allotting units of you can consume, your household can consume such and such amount of food, or is there currency, whether stored in debit cards or whatever, that you put quantities on, and you can pay for anything in a certain quantity of this thing, that seems like the question. And I have to say I found this this moment particularly frustrating because I'm a little unclear still. This is always something I've actually been a little unclear about parecon, and this was very unhelpful.
It's very hard, me being a small c communist, as in, I would love to get to a classless, stateless, moneyless society. But his bit about market abolitionism, I'm fine with getting rid of markets when we can, but the overstatement of how bad markets are is, I feel like that's very much an unforced error. Markets have a number of drawbacks. One of the biggest ones being that they are inherently biased towards previous actors within said markets. So they will distort based upon what has happened in the past, or to put that more simply, monkey see, monkey do. Which makes things like swarm technology superior to markets when it comes to that form of, I guess, artificial intelligence. And honestly, I'd be very interested to see a socialist breakdown by somebody who really understands swarm technology in a way to approach economic planning that is neither market-based nor centrally planned by a bureaucracy. But I feel like there's an emotional component. I've argued with friggin' ANCAP since 2014. So someone brings up markets, there's a rage point there. But you can't let that emotional overstatement get in there and make you say something like it being one of the worst things that we've ever developed. We've developed nuclear weapons. I think markets are bad, and maybe they will doom us all in terms of global warming, but I don't think it's just markets in that sense.
Yeah, this is, some of the big stuff in socialist debate. Yeah, what happens with markets and what role do we want them to have? And I don't know, frankly, here I'd probably split the bill. I'm not really, I think what Albert says about markets being among the most destructive institutions in our history. I mean, there is a case to be made there, destroying all the species, melting the polar ice caps. This is because of that big classic feature of markets, right? You're looking at you're paying for the product or service. You're not thinking about all the side effects of your big transactions, what they call the externalities, right? And there's different ways of trying to, deal with that through reforms and through different visions of markets being put in a more like holistic framework under a socialist system. Like a lot of socialists will say they're willing to accept markets on a very limited scale with rough equality of consumer incomes for like consumer goods, for stuff like clothes and food and, bars and experiences, because there's so much variety and people really value that compared to, areas like, internet data service or oil refineries, stuff like that, where there's not a huge amount of variety. People just want the basic options and for the services to work. So to me, I feel like it's a legitimately debatable area, what role we want markets to have, and especially issues like price, maybe future socialist system. Yeah, we have like rough equality of income. So markets aren't going to be hilariously lopsided like they are today, where so many people can't get their basic medical needs met. But if you're a billionaire, you can get a facelift for millions of dollars and have a very easy time finding a market that will cater to your needs, So these are like legitimately like debatable issues though. But again, it's always interesting because when I see someone debating like across a big ideological divide, like with, some liberal market favoring person versus some kind of socialist or leftist, to me, you're usually supposed to be arguing about like the big divide rather than like the intramural intra-left debates. And not to say, they should never be brought up. Why would anything not be brought up? But to me, this is, again, a little bit of a kind of a wandering choice here.
Like sort of the same way that it's weird that, there's so much time spent on balanced job complexes, because if you're arguing with somebody who doesn't even agree with you that that we should do away with capitalist ownership, that we should have, workers' control, it's a little weird to spend that much time talking about your sort of the long scenic tour to your view about exactly how job tasks should be distributed, in future democratic workplaces. Since before you even get to that debate, you have to agree that we should socialize those workplaces in the first place, take them out of the hands of their current owners.
I feel like some of the big stuff's just not coming up. I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe Michael's there to defend parecon specifically. Maybe that's why he's kind of bringing in these very specific ways of looking at some of these issues. Maybe we should give him that much slack.
Yeah. I'll just point out, by the way, with Destiny, so two things here. One that I'm very surprised of is he really hasn't hit back very much. I haven't seen him attempting to really poke a lot of holes. He's kind of thrown up a couple of objections. And this is really interesting because when I was on Destiny's stream, and also when he was reacting to this stream, he mentioned that he didn't seem to think of this as a debate as much as more a discussion, which is weird because, yes, he said debate on his channel, and nobody else
you can see on the screen right now. This is Destiny's YouTube channel, Socialism versus Capital, Destiny.
Yeah. So clearly it's being framed as a debate,
which is where I got the idea.
Yeah, but I really haven't seen Destiny push back on a lot of this stuff, and even when there are the unforced errors. So I don't know if it's waiting or.
Yeah. I think the little bit that I did see before for the end of it, he maybe does get a little bit more aggressive. But you're right, the pushback has been fairly light. But yeah, I think on the market point, like there is. So I think there are two questions that Brent usefully separated before. One of them is whether you should see a totally marketless form of socialism as a sort of normative endpoint goal, and the other is whether is whether you think that we entirely know how to implement that goal, or maybe even whether you're confident that we'll ever get all the way there. And I think that is a useful thing to separate, right? So, like that's the approach, like my boy G.A. Cohen takes in this book, Why Not Socialism. He talks about he gives this sort of view of what he sees as like the animating ideals behind socialism that like are in tension with any sort of markets at all existing, because he gives some very broad objections to any kind of market economy, but then he also very frankly says, look, we don't how to design a functioning modern economy, without any sort of markets at all. And he talked a little bit about like John Romer's, proposal for, market socialism, and says, hey, this would at least much more closely approximate these ideals, than capitalism would, so that's certainly worth pursuing. And as far as how far we'll be able to get after, who knows, right? And I think certainly the distinction Brent is making is the right one, between consumer goods and services, which would be not only things like healthcare, but things like like your example about internet service, that it's like, certainly, at least if you're talking about the kind of people who exist right now, and maybe someday in the far future we'd have people with totally different preferences, new socialist man or whatever, but certainly the kind of people that would be living under socialism initially, because they're the same kind of people who live right now. Most of us do care about like it matters to us what kinds of goods we're consuming in these consumer market areas. Like it matter, like we're very invested in like a lot of like very fine grained differences between different products. It would be, I'd be very upset if like I want Ardbeg and I get Jim Beam, that's very upsetting.
You and I should discuss bourbon sometime, because I'd be interested in your opinions on good bourbon. I think Basil Hayden and Booker's are the two that I really like there. But whereas when it comes to like internet service, like literally, I think even right now, people who exist in this society this second, you'd be a really weird person if you had specific preferences or you gave a shit about the difference between different providers. All you want is for it to work and for it to be reasonably fast. That's it, right? All you want out of healthcare is that you get the medicine that you need, and you don't have to wait around forever for it. I think, and this is an important distinction. Like this is the point that Lee Phillips and Mikhail Rozworski make at the end of People's Republic of Walmart. Which is that there are things that there are things that are that we already know how to plan efficiently, and there are things that we don't already know how to plan efficiently. And they do agree that we have to at least, market socialism has to at least be a starting point. Technology gets better while we figure out more things. And there are even things that maybe it would be very nice to have to be planned because they're very important. They meet important human needs that maybe we don't entirely know how to plan effectively. So like they mention food production is an obvious case of that. But that's also where you had like the biggest disasters of the kind of authoritarian state socialisms that existed in the 20th century, was with regard to food production. So that one might be one that you'd be like very rationally cautious about taking out of the market. But certainly, look, even if it's very important to people that they have the sort of choice that's most easily enabled by consumer markets. And I also know it's easy sometimes for radicals to be very dismissive of that, as like whatever. Like it's that important that people have 100 kinds of toothpaste, to pick between. And of course, that maybe isn't important, but I would also point to the existence of countries like the Soviet Union, where the frustration of Soviet citizens as consumers were a big part of mass dissatisfaction with those systems, and a big part of why so many working class people were completely willing to, see those systems collapse and not, fight to preserve them. So I think this is something that we ignore or trivialize, at our peril. So yeah, maybe those consumer markets, that's where those coordination problems, are most significant. But with, but that's certainly, at the very least, that doesn't mean that there isn't lots of shit that we currently
in the society that we live in, that we currently is currently treated as commodities, that we stress out all the time about our access to, that we worry about paying the bills, etc., that couldn't be or shouldn't be decommodified, even in the kind of socialism that we could have like now, like 5 minutes after capitalism.
What's really interesting, because you mentioned like the new socialist man. You remember like everybody in like the 1930s with the new Soviet man and people's preferences being retrained. So I have some interesting experience in this, in that I'm an Appalachian Trail 2,000 miler. So I've walked all 2,200 miles of the Appalachian Trail from Maine to Georgia. And one of the things that I found, what was really interesting there, was that once, like, through hikers on the AT brag about how little they have and would have like competitions to try to have less. But also we would get like really particular about our brand of stove versus someone else's design. And I think in a non-market economy, you can still have that really fun sort of specificity and game of one-upsmanship that we see with capitalism, but you don't need 100 brands of toothpaste because that's insane.
Yeah, and this is why, obviously it's why socialists like debate this sort of thing. And again, if we're able to move in this direction, I'm sure we'll see every kind of version of this tinkered with, which would help us put some of these issues to bed. Just my last thought on this, though, is what Brenton was saying. Like, this has been a lot of Albert talking at length and mild objections from Destiny, or, at some points where he was like really laying out like opposing views. But it's been for a debate, it's been pretty light on the confrontations. This is kind of like, I was mentioning this to Ben the other day. This is like the part of like a boxing match where the guys are just like circling each other and nothing's happening and the audience is mad and they're booing. That's what I'm feeling right now. Like, come on, like say something rude. Like let's get some fireworks here. I'm hoping that Destiny will come in the last quarter here and give us some. I want some King Kong versus Godzilla here.
I was just going to bring that up. That's, or no, was that video, the Bambi versus Godzilla, which is just like 5 minutes of the credits played while Bambi grazes, and then Godzilla's stopping, and then you have another 5 minutes of credits. So let's keep watching.
Let's watch.
And the income is a claim on output.
Okay.
Right? In other words, it's you can think of it as dollars if you want.
Okay.
It's a claim on output, right? So that you can get stuff. Now, what stuff do you want to get? Well, you have your last year's consumption, and you have indicative prices, and you know your income. So you make a proposal, and you propose what you think you would like. And this also affects your workplace activity, because you may decide to work more hours, right? You want a fancy violin or something, so you may decide that you want to work more hours. But whatever it is, you are coming up with a proposal that is based on your income for your consumption. Now, you make that proposal, and so does everybody else in your neighborhood and in your consumer council in your neighborhood. And so now your household has a proposal, but so does your whole neighborhood, right? And now the sum of neighborhoods has a proposal. These proposals are put into the planning system, as are proposals from workplaces for what to produce. So if you're in a bicycle factory, it's a proposal about how many bicycles you can produce and maybe some investment and so on and so forth. If you're in some other place, it's proposals for that. Now, there's no reason to suspect that these things are going to mesh, right? There's no reason to suspect that you expressing your desires to consume are going to want in sum total for the whole society the amount that you as a producer in sum total for the whole society want to produce. In fact, it's far more likely that what is proposed for production will be less than what is proposed for consumption.
Sure.
Right?
Just a quick question.
Now there's just an iteration mechanism.
Yeah.
There's a back and forth, and you arrive at a plan.
Can I ask just a quick question? In all of society, assuming people are doing an average amount of work, everybody makes the same amount of money. Everybody has the same price.
If you're working in the same duration, the same intensity, and the same onerousness, you all get the same income.
Gotcha. Okay. So every household is working theoretically the same amount, with harder working people putting in more effort, getting more. Yeah. Not working harder jobs necessarily, but putting in more effort. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So these two, the consumers and the workers, would go back and forth. What would these negotiations look like? Let's say the consumers all wanted like a certain thing, and the producers, the laborers, didn't want to create that thing. How do the consumers bargain for those things?
They don't really. You don't have to verbally bargain for it. But let's take an example. This year is going to be hotter than last year.
Okay.
Okay. We know how many air conditioners were proposed for last year. Okay. So the workplaces are proposing to produce. They have to produce socially valued stuff. So they actually are proposing more air conditioners.
When you
But
say,
it turns,
wait, real quick, that's an important thing. When you say they have to produce socially valued stuff, therefore they have to produce.
they don't get income if they don't.
Who determines what is socially valuable? Where's that determination made?
The consumers.
And as
It
part of
has
this
to be
bargaining
consumed.
process?
Well, it has to be consumed. In other words, if I suppose I want to be the shortstop for the New York Yankees,
Mhm.
I can't. At least I can't earn an income doing that, and they also won't hire me. But I also can't go into my backyard, dig holes, and fill them in, working long hours, incredibly hard, and with my kid shooting arrows at me, so it's onerous.
Yeah, I guess my
And I
question is
want a
like,
high income. I can't do that. I have to be producing something of use.
yeah, my
of
question is like,
value.
what if consumers are demanding some good that laborers just don't want to produce? Or how would you like some crazy example, like sex toys? Let's say somebody
it's a
wants
good
to have like a dildo factory, right? Like a consumer wants to produce something like that, but laborers are like, well, this is ridiculous. We don't want to make this. Who determines like that's like a social good? Or
That I don't think that's the good example. I think the good example is consumers want X,
Mhm.
right? And it turns out, and they don't have a good idea of what X entails. They just want X. They like X, right?
Sure.
But it turns out over here, X entails very hard work,
Okay.
or it entails very onerous work. And the amount of X that consumers want, it's just more than workers are willing to provide. So when the consumer request comes in and the worker request comes in, and this could certainly happen, right? And will happen often.
Okay.
Then the consumption demand is higher than the
Worker
workplace
supply. Yeah.
Right. So the workers see that, and the consumers see it, and the workers might go up a little bit, and the consumers might go down a little bit.
Why
and
would the
that's
workers
demand.
go up? Why would the
Because
workers?
price changes,
So the
and because they have to do socially valued labor.
Uh-huh.
And
wait,
and
hold on.
they
Wait,
have
I gotta understand this. I gotta understand this. When you say price changes, are you saying that like those laborers? Because I guess I'm confused when you say price changes, because laborers are all paid the same, and you're not paid based on your output ever. You're paid based on the effort of your work. So what would the
except
price
for one
change in?
thing.
Yeah.
Except for one thing, you have to suppose we're in a workplace,
Okay.
right? We have a certain amount of equipment,
Okay.
a certain amount of inputs, and a certain amount of laborers.
Okay.
Doing socially valued labor, and this is what you were pointing to all the way back at the beginning of this discussion.
Mhm.
Doing socially valued labor means that those assets, right,
Mhm.
have to be used sensibly. We don't want to waste them. So, in other words, we don't want to produce stuff that isn't wanted, that goes into the ocean. That would be
course.
wasting the assets. But it would also be wasting the assets if we produced stuff that was less desired than we were able to produce, right? And if we produce stuff that nobody would buy because the price was too high. So is the indicative price, which the price keeps changing in the planning process,
Mhm.
right? Doesn't go on forever, but it goes on for a while.
Or I guess.
I mean, we're covering a lot of ground, and
Sure.
your questions are very, very good.
Yeah, I'm just
Much better than most people in economics departments would ask.
Okay.
It's true.
So here, so this is like the question that I don't understand. So let's say that I am at a factory, okay,
Yeah.
and let's say that we have one machine that fabricates a widget, okay. This machine fabricates a widget. Let's say that consumers, but let's say like fabricating that widget is like it's fairly decently hard work, decently empowering, but decently hard. Okay, so
Okay.
all of us not all of us, but a lot of us share this job at the factory, et cetera, et cetera. Let's say that when it comes time for the consumers and the laborers to get together and figure out, what do you want? The consumers are, for whatever reason, they want a lot of widgets. All of a sudden, these like
Or none.
or well, let's say
That's
a lot.
even worse, right?
Maybe, sure, but let's say a lot because this works better in my
Okay.
mind. So let's say
Okay.
they want a lot of widgets. Now, you guys are all the owners of the factory. Now, you're not really incentivized to do more of this hard work because why would you? Now, you're saying, well, the price would increase, but if I get paid the same regardless of my output, Why would I increase my output when I'm
You
just paying
get
on
paid the
effort?
same.
Uh-huh.
You get paid the same per hour,
Sure.
right? Of
Yeah, of course.
average intensity and average onerousness, as long as what you're doing is socially valuable. As the price changes, right, you may no longer be doing socially valuable work with all those hours that you're putting in. So that's one phenomenon. The phenomenon that you're talking about, though, is basically just you need more workers, right? In other words, if last year we produced 1 million widgets, and for some weird reason, this was what I was going to get at it with the air conditioners, with some weird but justifiable reason that the consumers will stick to, right? They want 2 million widgets. You can't deliver unless you have more workers. Right?
Well, unless you,
So,
and
but
like you said,
but
if you stop producing some other thing, maybe you could.
which is
right?
exactly what's going to happen.
Okay,
If-
wait. So let me make.
If people are going for 2 million widgets instead of 1 million widgets,
Mhm.
those people have budgets, right? They
Yeah.
have to be getting less of something else.
Okay. So let me see if I understand this. So you have a factory. Let's say you produce widgets and zidgets. Okay. Let's say that the widgets you produce 1 million of these, the zidgets you produce 1 million. And next year, people want 1.5 million widgets and they only want 500,000 zidgets, right? So what you're saying is, well, that negotiation that would take place would draw some labor away because the labor on the million zidgets would be less socially valuable than 500,000 because that's all people are demanding, right? So they would move to the widgets.
It would be worthless.
Sure. So this. No, okay, so maybe I'm missing something fundamental here. This just sounds like a market interaction with more layers of like abstractness.
But that's because when we think of what a market is, we're told by popular culture and also
wait. Okay, can we skip
training?
I don't. So regardless of popular culture, so here's my understanding of a market. Okay, the difference between a market and a planned economy is the inputs and the outputs in a market are determined by supply and demand. In a planned economy, those inputs and outputs are just determined by some commission that makes a decision. So if
on the plan side, you're almost right.
Okay.
Because the planners oftentimes will go out and test preferences.
Yeah, they try to survey. It's not
supply.
completely arbitrary.
Right.
They'll try to say like you should.
But the
have
other
this option.
side isn't true either.
Okay, go ahead. Tell me why.
So, for instance, I'm thinking up an example here.
Mhm.
Do you think the public would like television without ads?
Yeah.
Has anybody in TV until the cable companies came along? I guess it's not a good example.
Sure. So
the cable companies
well, we can actually, that's a great example. We can use that. So would consumers like TV without ads? That is true. There would be a quantity demanded of TV without advertisement. However, the cost, right? Suppliers would only be willing to supply TV without ads at a given cost. And the quantity demanded of television without ads at a high cost, which is what it would have to be sold as, would probably be quite low, right? So
this is economics 101 with the supply and demand curves.
Sure.
What actually is going on in markets is bargaining. You're right.
Okay.
And it's driven by power. That's why maybe in your junior year, you take a course about monopoly and you learn that monopoly pricing, in fact, isn't like the other pricing. Monopolies can use their bargaining power to kick up their prices.
Sure.
All right. So it isn't the case that it's all a function of supply and demand. Even if it was, it would have all sorts of problems. But it's not.
So I would agree with you that I'm using an incredibly simplistic model to analyze this. But for you to demonstrate, you to show me why the model doesn't work, you'd have to
do it again. Do it again.
Yeah. So the quantity demanded of ad-free television at the price that suppliers would be willing to price it at is probably very low. Like, for instance, like if you want ad-free programming today, you can get it. You just have to pay for HBO Plus or pay for like the advanced Hulu.
And where's the money going?
Well, the first handoff is probably to the people providing the service, whoever's running the network or whatever. And then there are many handoffs.
Okay, so the first thing is profits.
Okay.
Right? I mean, switch it to pharmaceuticals and it's easy.
Sure, we do pharmaceuticals.
Stark.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so it's stark. In the case of pharmaceuticals, the cost of production is nearly zero, and the relatively speaking, and the gigantic cost of sales is because they have bargaining power and they can jack up the prices. They do.
I disagree.
And then the income goes to profits.
I disagree with that. The cost of production is illusory in pharmaceuticals because the production has to take into account the high cost of research and development, right? That's where like the marginal cost.
Much of which is paid for outside the pharmaceutical industry.
No, that's not true.
look, here we're just going to disagree.
Yeah, we can we can flat
the
disagree.
bottom line is, do the pharmaceutical
All right, I was going to go a little longer, but that does require a response. I mean, so as to everything up till this last point, I'll just say that if parecon is ever going to be the demand of a mass movement, we're going to need a much punchier explanation of how it works. But on this last point, Destiny is just wrong, and Albert is totally right that like I mentioned the Rhetoric and Phillips book earlier, People's Republic of Walmart. They've got some pretty astonishing stats on this, and like the vast majority of genuinely new drugs, so NMEs, new molecular entities, are produced by the public sector. They, like in things like public university, labs, or the National Institutes of Health. There are like most of what the sort of research that's directly being done by the pharmaceutical companies, as opposed to them just enclosing the profits from public sector research, is just coming up with small variations on existing molecular entities so they can patent the new thing, and in fact, it's a huge problem, right? That like I think Phillips and Rhetoric make a really good point there, that like the kinds of things that there's the most market incentive to come up with new drugs for, oftentimes don't really align with with like the biggest needs, especially the biggest sort of easily predictable medium-term needs. So like with antibiotics, especially, like this is something that could get like very scary very soon, because there's like, if you want to not have to start like amputating a bunch of limbs like it's the 18th century again, like you do need to keep up, with those, but the market signals, mostly favor, researching things that people will continue to need over and over and over again, rather than, just some antibiotic, that like, you take and then it's done. So again, that argument is in the People's Republic of Walmart. If I don't know if I'm doing it justice here, but
vaccines are the same way. There's not a lot of money in developing a vaccine most of the time.
Yeah, which by the way is why, like, in order for us to get the COVID vaccine as quickly as we did, like that's why there was massive state involvement, in making that happen. Although ultimately, the companies, are going to get the are going to make a lot of money off of it in the long term. But it's not at all clear that just like market forces on their own would have led to Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca getting there this quickly. Okay, it's
lost you guys for a second there. Sorry. Am I back?
Yeah,
you're back.
Okay. I think I had a tiny stroke there for a second. The same, just what you guys were saying about pharmaceuticals and vaccines, just to say the same is true for like most tech. I have a whole chapter on this in my international smash hit book, Bit Tyrants, which you can pick up. Chapter 8 is just about this. I mean, a lot of folks know that the internet itself, which all of our tech relies on, comes from the military. It was originally called DARPANet because it was the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration Network. DARPA is the Pentagon's research arm. And they, along with some of the universities, developed the early internet, and then through the National Science Foundation, gradually handed it off to the private sector in the early 90s through a really ugly privatization story you can read about in that book. But also even like the mobile technology that's actually in your phone, like the antenna systems, the fancy multi-touch screen itself, it mostly comes from public sector research or research funded directly through the NSF or some other public body. Research is expensive, and you never know if you're going to discover something that ever cures a disease or lets you do something with your phone. So it's very difficult for a near-term profit-obsessed capitalist entity like a corporation to justify that very expensive, uncertain long-term investment when your competitors are pouring money into, lowering prices or slick ads or something and put you out of business. So there's a reason why the state sector, whether the military or someone else, tends to lead on this. The best, I would say, book on this actually is Maria Mazzucato's book on the entrepreneurial state, which looks at drugs and green energy. And I stole a lot of the stuff about mobile tech from her. A very, very, very worthwhile book. Easy to read. You will be smarter than idiots you debate with if you pick it up. And if you don't feel like reading a book, let me say, just on the Current Affairs YouTube channel, I have a video I did about the iPhone and why the relentless flood of right-wing memes from idiots saying, oh, you don't like capitalism, and yet you post from a smartphone. Like these ridiculously dumb, repetitive arguments. They're based in the opposite of the record, and you can watch that in that video or check out those.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, you could, with at least equal justice, say, "Oh, curious, you don't like state economic planning, yet you use the internet."
Can I just say that I think it's wonderful that from the three of us, the Economist is like the funniest and most charismatic one of the panel.
Very debatable. I don't know how I would do if we put it to a vote. You never know.
Well, you've got number one in my heart. And by the way, I did notice a comment about this earlier. I am drinking blueberry wine, and it was disgusting when I first started, but it's getting better with every glass.
That does tend to be how that works. All right.
Companies make huge profits.
No,
they don't.
The rate of profit in a pharmaceutical company is going to be probably about the rate of profit in any industry. If there was greater profits to be had there, then more people would invest.
Go out into the real world. That's what Economics 101 says. It says everything is perfectly competitive.
No. It's not about it. No
rate of profit at all. Right? It says the rate of profit is zero. Right? It will be competed down to zero. That's what we're told. Right? The reality is that different industries have very different rates of profits, and it's a function of their bargaining power.
Okay, here's a question. If the rate of the pharmaceutical company's profit was so high, why wouldn't every single capital investor just run there and
barriers to entry are high?
No, there's not. Anybody can go and trade stocks right now of pharmaceutical companies they want. Anybody can go onto an open market and buy those stocks.
Buy stocks.
Yeah, but why wouldn't the price of those stocks and dividends or whatever be driven up and up and up and up until the company has no more money left to distribute? Like at some point, you can't have these companies that are making.
I have to admit, I don't know. I have never understood, and I don't understand the stock market. So I'm very hesitant.
Well, capital markets are a pretty important part of the profitability of major publicly traded companies.
A lot of what I focus on isn't existing companies and existing relations, right? I think those are so horrendous that putting my time into proving that they're horrendous isn't worth much, because it's totally obvious. The income distribution in the United States is so incredibly skewed, so incredibly distorted, that 4 or 5 people own as much as half the population. It doesn't matter how we tweak it. It's disgusting. So it doesn't matter how we tweak it. The violence to the ecology is disgusting, et cetera, et cetera. So I try and focus on the alternative.
Sure,
because
I understand.
I think you're right. You're right that we will never get anything else if we can't make a case that an alternative which looks better is also possible.
Sure, I understand. Okay, just for the record, I feel like I'm being pretty fair in this conversation. I'm trying to. You told me in one hand, you told me to go out into the real world to analyze things, and then the other hand, we're talking about rate of profits, and you don't care at all about capital markets. These two things are
No, but I do. If you look at the income of the owners of pharmaceutical companies and out in the world, I will predict that they are hugely wealthy.
Of course.
Okay. And but hugely wealth, not gigantic wealth, because their bargaining power allows them to jack up the prices of medicines to people who have no choice but to try and get them.
Okay. Well, let's move back to the how households figure out
factory.
Yeah. So the problem that I had was it sounded like we were getting a description of a sort of market economy with more layers of bureaucracy kind of in between. That if consumers are demanding more of a product and less of another, that producers will produce more of a product and less of another. That almost sounds like a market signal, but we're communicating these things not via currency directly, but between like councils that we've placed in between these institutions. Why is that superior? Yeah.
It's superior. Some of what, a part of what you just said, I think is true.
Okay.
That is to say, markets are communicating and participatory planning is communicating. True. And markets are facilitating decisions and participatory planning is facilitating decisions. True. And they're doing it in light of some kind of an estimate of costs and benefits. True. Markets don't measure costs and benefits properly.
Well,
not even remote.
So I have to ask what you mean by cost and benefit now. What do you mean by that?
Let's take the cost of production of a cigarette.
Okay.
And production and consumption also.
Okay.
So markets don't take into account what are called externalities. Every economist accepts this, agrees with. They're the ones who came up with it.
Of course.
So what that means is that in the exchange in a market system, the buyer and the seller interact and they arrive at a price and they make a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And the buyer is aware of the impact on the buyer and the seller is aware of the impact on the seller. Neither one gives a shit about the impact in the broader society of the production or the consumption.
Mm-hmm.
So the consumer doesn't know about, gets no information about, and doesn't care about, because there's no way to care about, the implications of the production of the good for, say, the ecology,
Sure.
or for, say, the health of the workforce,
Sure.
or whatever you want. And the producer, in the same way, doesn't think about the effect of the product, let's say, alcohol, on the community,
mm-hmm.
right? And excessive alcoholism affecting the whole community. Okay. One of the key things about participatory planning is that the process facilitates taking into account the externalities. It takes a while to develop some of this, but that's the claim.
Yeah, so
right?
This is something that I completely disagree with. I'm intensely interested in it. So let's look at one of the most common externalities, pollution, right?
Okay.
So who is incentivized when because we've pooled all the consumers and we've pooled, or maybe not all of them, but in a neighborhood or whatever, we've pooled some consumers and we've pooled some suppliers, and now we're trying to negotiate on if we're demanding widgets or whatever. Let's say that the production of widgets causes some level of pollution. Now, in my market economy, this is just damage that's totally unaccounted for. Pollution doesn't drive up. Oftentimes, it drives down the cost of a good, which means people are incentivized to pollute, right? Which is a problem because there's no accounting for that in a market economy. But in your system of this market with an abstraction, how is either side incentivized to say no, don't do that?
Let's take the big neighborhood around Chicago, which wants to consume clean air, right? So they want to consume clean air. And clean air has a price, right? And cleaning the air has a price, and messing it up. So in other words, throughout the whole system, these neighborhood councils, these collective consumption units, and so it's not all individuals anymore, summed up. There's collective consumption, right? They have consumption demands or consumption desires, right? So there's a demand for it. And on the supply side, something dramatic has changed also. So if you're a workplace in capitalism, one of the ways to make a profit is to make a better good that more people want.
Okay.
Another way to make a profit is to make the same good cheaper by doing something that, has it take less inputs or something. You could also make a profit, of course, by driving down wages. That's not a good thing, but that is something that you do, or by making people work faster and harder and so on and so forth. Okay, so in a participatory economy, the first two ways exist. The last way is pretty much gone because the workers are in charge and are not going to exploit themselves. But in capitalism, another way to make a profit is to dump costs off onto society. right? So in other words, if you can have your workplace have some of its costs, or even a lot of its costs, right, dumped off onto society, instead of you're paying those costs,
What do you
you're
mean?
going
What
to
kind
make
of
more
costs are you
profit.
talking about here?
Pollution. Now this is what pollution is.
Okay.
So in other words, if you're producing, you said the widget involves some pollution. Well, you can produce the widget with less pollution, but that's expensive. If you produce it with pollution and you don't cut back the pollution, that's less expensive. Society pays the price. In fact, if you can lower your cost of production, right, by increasing pollution, that will increase your profits. So there are all sorts of pernicious effects.
But these same incentives,
problem.
still arguably exist in your system, though. Let's say
No.
that let's say that I've got a factory that's producing 1 million widgets, and my consumers now, when they come to negotiate, they want 1 million more widgets, and we'll say all else equal, they just want 1 million more widgets. Maybe there's a way to double the production of widgets using a more pollution-heavy process. Why wouldn't the workers opt for that over doing like, more work?
Why would they?
Because it's easier to do than the alternative.
Wait a minute.
What?
Remember we agreed that the workers are going to get their income for doing socially valuable labor and for the duration, intensity, and onerousness.
Sure, but we still agree that workers would want to do, I say, easier work over harder work. Like no worker wants to work like super hard, grueling tasks.
Well, you get more income for hard. Remember, you get paid for that.
No, wait, no, you don't. You said you get more income paid for effort and for hours worked, not for harder work.
No, I did. Onerousness.
Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, can you explain that? Hold on. This is a big divergence from what I
imagine.
Yeah, can you define onerousness, by the way?
Yeah,
because earlier you said like getting shot with arrows, and I was a little confused myself.
Yeah, what do you mean? What do you mean by onerous work then? I guess.
Okay, so remember that glass factory that the woman was in who became the accountant?
Sure.
Okay, so she was working in front of the open furnace.
Okay.
Okay. Somebody else in that factory, in the old version, okay? So let's say she was working a 40-hour week or a 50-hour week in front of the open furnace. Somebody else is working not in front of an open furnace, but in front of, but on an assembly line. And somebody else is working in an air-conditioned office. Okay. So the furnace is by far the most onerous.
Oh,
in the eyes of everybody working there. That's who has to decide. That's what self-management is.
I
don't decide.
Yeah,
I
didn't.
Decide. They
this
decide.
Is okay. I have to integrate that. I don't want to go back and challenge it, but if I would have known that, then that would have been a whole other dimension by which I would have no idea how you would decide what work is more onerous, like a janitor versus a doctor. Some surgeries can go 20 plus hours.
Fine. And if it's really onerous, right, then that can be higher pay for it. The workforce decides.
Okay. If you have to take a call real quick, you can. That's fine. If you need to.
You can take if you need a minute.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, go for it.
It won't be quick.
Well, it seems like your answers are very, really quick.
Well, it's a little difficult. It's coming from somebody who's in assisted living.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And she's probably having trouble with her TV or something right now, and she wants help.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to wrap things up here? We're at 2.5 hours. We can go longer. It's up to you.
It's 11:30. It could go on forever.
Of course.
Yeah. We can always do this another time, or Destiny can have.
Maybe we should digest this.
Yeah, sure, and then come back
again if you want to.
Okay.
Sure.
Did you say there were questions that came in? Were there?
I was going to ask if anybody has some questions. Does anybody want to get out a question or two here at the end?
How are you doing that?
There's a chat that I can see. This is streaming on YouTube live right now, so there's a chat.
Oh, it's a chat. I see.
Yeah, it's just a text chat. But if you have to go, it's okay.
All right. So why don't? It's fine with me. I'm happy to do this again if you want.
Yeah, sure.
And address other issues, whatever you want to address. It's certainly okay with me. But it would be a little easier now if I could call that person back.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah, we'll just wrap it up here. I think it was a good stream. There's a lot to get into, so we can host another one soon. It's fine.
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation.
Can I get a plug?
Yeah, go ahead.
Give a plug. There's a podcast called Revolution Z. Obviously, the people who listen to you know all about podcasts and are into listening. And maybe some of them would like to take a look at that podcast, which addresses issues like this and all sorts of related issues, the election and vision and for families and for economy and for politics and so on and so forth. I guess you can just find a podcast easily. I'm not very good at this stuff, I have to tell you honestly. But I guess if you look up Revolution Z on Apple Podcasts and on the various other platforms, you just find it. So if people would do that, that would be great.
Yeah, if everybody can go check out Revolution Z, I will share that on Twitter, and then I'll also put it in the video description for this when it goes up on the channel.
Can you send me a link to this so I can put it on ZNet?
Yeah, I'll email you a link to this, and you can do whatever, you can download it and do whatever you want with it.
Do you shorten them? I mean, are you really going to use 2.5 hours?
Oh, we'll throw the whole thing up. Maybe we'll take clips out of it, but the whole thing will be put up.
So you don't spend a lot of time editing it?
Probably not this. People will listen to it. People will just turn it on while they do the dishes or something. So.
Yeah, the long form content is a lot more popular.
And then they'll start throwing the dishes.
I think people are going to like this one. It went well.
Okay. I thank you. I hope so. I hope it was useful. And
yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you too, Stephen.
Thanks a lot.
All right. We'll close it out here.
Okay.
We made it.
We made it. We got to the end. This is a little funny because so often when we do these, we're we're watching some like formal debate. So like the cutoff is like when, okay, this is the part where, Christopher Hitchens and William Lane Craig, have finished their closing statements and now they're going to go to Q&A and we won't watch that part. But here, because it's just it's a Twitch, it's like a Twitch stream YouTube video. So it's, so yeah, it peters out in a slightly strange way at the end there, like it's like, he needs to call his friend back. But I want to so Rob, your image was gone for a minute, but you said you think you could hear everything. So I wanted to get your thoughts about the stock market part, because clearly, like, whatever's true about the substance of it, right? I mean, clearly, just rhetorically, that's the part that made Albert look the worst.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And I've seen worse, but I feel like that, does tend to reflect, finance and just economics in general tends to be an area where people don't want to bone up as much as they might perhaps on stuff that's more like, immediately gripping parts of like the political discourse. So it's sort of a type, But yeah, in the stock market, like this is a common thing that people struggle with. It's supposed to be the capital market, the financial markets, where people divert all the liquid wealth that exists in all the savings accounts and bank accounts across the land and people's investment portfolios of wealthy households, and decide what kind of businesses and they're going to direct all that capital to and invest in. It's a simple enough thing on its own, but of course, like the obvious criticism of that we leftists have is that what it really tends to be is just a way of a financial sector just ludicrously enriching itself. Like the amount of capital that's invested via the stock market is very small compared to like the overall volume of trade, certainly, So like because of that just basic disconnection though, and the fact that these companies use their profits for stock buybacks, which just benefits shareholders rather than doing the investment that capital markets are supposed to do, I think that makes leftists just kind of like skeptical towards any kind of, it makes people not want to engage and understand finance. And so like, this is a kind of, it's an avoidable trip up. You can learn about this. There's lots of leftist good books on finance, debaters. You don't have to have this happen to you. Doug Henwood's book, Wall Street, it's a little dated. It's still like very, very good. Actually, I'm not sure if it's still in print, but you can get a copy. Do that, And the other economics that came up, just to throw this in too, which I enjoyed, they did get to externalities, which I appreciate. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. The last bit was when they were looking at drugs and the cost of drugs. Things like that, they have a very low cost of physically making the units. We call that a low marginal cost. So these are artificially scarce goods. It's true that all the cost of those things is in the research, we call those the first copy costs. Once you've designed the drug or the vaccine or shot the movie or made the software, making copies so you can download them is almost costless. Like the cost is about zero, energy cost and server space, which are relatively cheap. But the fact is that we already discussed, like this research tends to come from the public sector in the first place. So people want to use that to justify high drug costs. Without those profits, wouldn't have the research that leads to that first copy. But as soon as you look at the history of this stuff, from vaccines to tech, like that argument is accurate, but it's just irrelevant because the companies don't do that research. That's why I thought of the economics of it. I also have general thoughts about the debate.
Yeah. So I did also want to circle back to the specific argument, which in terms of Albert's larger argument, I'm actually not sure. This is another thing where I'm not sure he needed to die on this particular hill anyway, but
Again.
Yeah, right. But he was saying that pharmaceutical companies are insanely profitable, and Destiny's objection seemed to be, and make sure I'm getting this right, that they have they must not be that much more profitable than any other industry, or else like everybody who buys stocks, would be buying, would be buying pharma stocks. I think I'm reproducing that accurately.
Yeah, that's about what I heard. Yeah. This is just, goofy. Pharmaceutical firms are among the most profitable of all the industries, including finance and big tech, like and insurance, like other hyper profitable industries. Like this is kind of a thing. And I think Albert actually did get to this. He said, the formal economics says that because you can invest your money anywhere, you tend to get uniform rates of profit. They tend to converge because of all the other abstract crap that's built into our supply and demand model, which we don't need to get to. But the reality is, like, what I always tell my students is markets aren't all the same. Like they're part of a market capitalist system, which we can talk about. But markets are really different one from another. And some, for example, markets have huge, all-powerful dominant firms, and some have a huge variety of little guys. Other industries are hyper profitable. And pharmaceuticals, is notorious for the amount of money they create because it comes from such clear human cruelty. Like there are more profitable industries than drugs. We mentioned tech and financial markets tend to be like that too. Often people would say these are rentier industries. They're using monopoly power or financial intermediary power, and that's getting into the econ weeds slightly there. But the fact is, like those stocks are among the higher price categories in the asset class of, corporate equities. Like they are hyper valuable. I think Econ 101, like Albert said, makes people think like, oh, all stocks and companies are equally expensive and valuable. Like they're not. They have hugely different earnings, and their stocks are usually proportionate to that. Like corporate stocks tend to trade at what they call a P/E ratio, a price to earnings ratio. Usually the earnings over like last 6 months.
That's what I was going to ask about, because it seems like maybe this is just too simple-minded, and I'm missing something about how financial markets work, or maybe Destiny is. But I would think that the obvious response to, like, if some industries are much more clearly some industries are much more profitable than others. That's just true, right? The rate of profit is much higher. But I think the obvious response to why doesn't everybody who buys stocks, why doesn't everybody buy stocks in the more profitable ones, is that stocks and the more profitable companies are going to trade at a higher cost.
Yeah, they're going to be more expensive.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why stock prices go up after big profit reports. Like every quarter, publicly traded companies have to report their profitability, and they do big earnings calls with big investors and shit. If a company announces a surprisingly profitable quarter, like broadly, you see every kind of thing day to day, but broadly their price of that stock is going to go up, reflecting the fact that, stock, it's a piece of ownership of a company, and you get a piece of its profit. Profit goes up, more valuable, more people buy it, and the price does go up. Like what Destiny described does happen. I think Destiny was just speaking sloppily there, or maybe unclearly in the moment.
Yeah, it could be that he had a better point in mind. It just came out in a weird way, but like,
yeah, he might have been rushing through it, I think. But that is the dynamic. And yeah, you look at industries, like food service or retail, they have much lower profitability levels, or trucking, stuff like that. This is the type of stuff you learn about if you read industry analysis and learn about one industry and how it works and who's in charge and how rich it is. No one does that anywhere, but you can do it.
Yeah, so but this also does sort of underscore why I think that was such an unforced error for Michael Albert, because like this really doesn't seem like an argument where he had like, even if like, okay, Albert is feeling like self-conscious in this discussion about like not knowing more about how capital markets work, despite being a critic of capitalism, and whatever. I mean, points for the moment of like points for being humble about it and not pretending he doesn't know more than he does, I guess. But like also, there's a virtue there, right? That like not everybody.
Bluffing can be worse. It's true.
Yeah, but
particularly
also,
in the long run.
Yeah. But also like you don't need to have, I think, a very deep knowledge of how capital markets work to get you're going to get more, sure, the more profitable stocks are going to be more expensive to buy, and that's why not everybody who does this buys them. Like that seems like a sort of first chapter of the Econ 101 textbook sort of insight.
I would agree with that. When we just kind of went through it here in 90 seconds or so, I talk fast, but still, like that's a pretty, that's not a big deal. Albert does bill himself as an economist sometimes, like on books and stuff, and I don't think as I recall in his memoir, I think he refers to not finishing the doctoral program that he was in for econ, but he's obviously very knowledgeable about it, but that does mean you're right. Like we should be able to expect him to be able to handle that. That's not much of a follow-up,
No, it's not. And again, like the thing that he would have needed to say on this point is something that like you clearly don't need to have completed a PhD in economics to say that, so like that's maybe, whatever.
It might have had something to do with how Destiny phrased it, because he seemed to phrase it as though he had some knowledge of the pharmaceutical markets, that people weren't running to throw a bunch of money at them, that they weren't this hugely profitable stock. And I think Albert might have just kind of decided to just run with that. And basically there was an unstated assumption that Albert seemed to take for granted, and that might have informed his response. I think it probably was because he was talking from a position of somewhat ignorance on this specific issue.
Yeah, we've all been in debates, like we know, like it's all like happening in real time. You can't always. Just like in real life, when you're driving home, you're like, oh, I should have fucking said that. Like it certainly happens with big debates. So anyone can, trip up sometimes, but it is simple enough, but I would say like if the person you're debating with says something confusingly, even just like clumsily, like without meaning to, like, it can, in a debate, it can throw you for a loop, but I've never heard anyone who economically argues that healthcare stocks are underpriced. Like that's never a thing I've seen. So I think I would credit it more likely to people stumbling through sentences.
It's also 11:30, and they both, like he just said, it was 11:30 at night, and they've just been talking for 2.5 hours. So maybe interaction at the end, neither of them weren't their best.
Yeah, that was something that I wanted to point out that when the sparks did start to fly, it seemed like both of them were pretty tired. And, there's only so long you can stay focused in that state. So like, I think that overall, like, to critique Destiny's and both of their like overall rhetoric in this debate, don't wait until that late in the debate to start pushing back against what your opponent is saying. You're not going to have the ability to do it. You need to be pushing back. I mean, at least from the 50% mark, if you're trying to listen and let them set things up. It really seemed like Albert controlled this debate from the very beginning to the very end.
Yeah, I think that gets to something I was saying here, like, so my broad impression of this is like Albert definitely dominated. I think he dominated by volume, which, I mean, I like Michael Albert, but that's somewhat characteristic of like his online debates. Because if people are debating, like through online posts, he'll debate, like he'll take paragraph by paragraph with huge responding paragraphs that are much larger. And I mean, again, I tend to like most of the things he says economically, but like that's a pretty, like there is an argument of exhaustion that you can do. And normally it's something that's more online where there's no limits to the content. But here, like, who can fail to love Michael's sweet boomer pre-internet sensibility? You're not going to edit this at all. People just listen to the entire boring conversation. Oh, Mike, it's the podcast era. Like, that's a huge amount. Certainly quality podcasts are edited.
And at the end, when he's talking, well, there's a podcast. I guess people listening to this know what a podcast is. And the fact that his phone was ringing, that he didn't mute it.
Oh my God, just was ringing, just fully ringing. I mean, anyone can have their ring go off, but it was just like ongoing.
Yeah.
I wonder who was calling.
Like, okay, you can forget to turn your ringer off, but that was ringing for like a minute.
That went for like some time. That was, for some time there. And so that was sort of my bigger issue with this debate, like it was argument through volume. I think it worked out for Michael here, like Destiny never got a word in edgewise. And like Brenton just mentioned, at the very, very, very end, he said, oh, if I had known what you said, I would have objected. Was that not 3 hours ago? Because he used onerousness. Like this, to me, the thing you say against Albert in this is that like his speaking style and his debate style is just pure academician. It's every possible objection and discursion we went down in this, drug prices, every single one of these detours we've mentioned already.
You think he would have stuck to like the bigger picture, parts of his argument much more than he did. I'm also, by the way, I've got to say, I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about the part at the end where Albert and Destiny were going back and forth about onerousness. Because I do think that there's like a core of Albert's point that's totally right. That like, look, I mean, we can, we can play dumb about this, but like, I think on a common sense level, I think we all know which job, is generally considered, like whether the job where you're standing next to the furnace for hours, or the job where you're at a desk, is considered to be more onerous. And I also take the point about workers. Okay, this is the whole, worker self-management is the core of the whole proposal. So of course, they get to decide that, like what counts as what. But it does tie into a much bigger picture thing I have about parecon, because like I have, again, I interviewed Albert. I read, there's a book called Alternatives to Capitalism that's like by Hanhel and Eric Olin Wright, which is like a book of battling essays back and forth. Eric Olin Wright is kind of a market socialist, and obviously Hanhel's a parecon guy. And, and so there are points where I was reading that book where I felt like I had, it's like, oh, okay, now I feel like I understand how parecon, would actually work. And then there are points when I'm listening to this, I'm like, I'm actually not sure I understand how this would work. And like, this is part of it, because it's like a lot of these things, like, are you just, how much workplace like autonomy at the level of individual workplaces is there actually in the system? Are you just making predictions about how workers at every single workplace would divide up job tasks? Or is there some sort of more centralized element that enforces all these things? Because to the extent that there's a more centralized system for enforcing all these requirements about balanced job complexes and paying people based on onerousness and all that stuff, to the extent that that's the idea, Destiny's pushback is actually totally legitimate, because it's like, well, okay, how do the enforcers of the centralized system decide you know,
What is onerous and
power and what counts as onerous. You know, like this sounds like kind of a nightmare to try to define. But to the extent that this is all supposed to be, it's just sort of up to the judgment, you know, like to the extent that these are just predictions about how workers would divide up, you know, job tasks in individual workplaces, then I don't know, wouldn't it vary wildly? Why do you assume that you get balanced job complexes in every workplace?
I'll agree. That was really weird. I also was having the biggest problem here with like where he was going on about price and how the price would change if people were like, I don't 100% buy Destiny's argument that, you know, the public suddenly is demanding a bunch of dildos. By the way, dildos will never be in short supply. That's I know how people are. That's never going to be a thing.
Which, by the way, I should say parenthetically, I mean, this is going to sound funny to say, but I wish they'd stuck with the dildos for a minute because actually there is like a totally different objection to parecon that's buried in there, which is about privacy, right? So if to the extent that people's consumption requests are being like filtered through, like, or being aggregated through like these consumer councils, then there is a real question there about like, because look, I mean, it's whether, I mean, we don't even have to do it with dildos. Like we could do it with anything, you know, like, but like anything that like might raise social approval or disapproval issues, right? Like, do you really
feel like we need more leather dog masks?
Yeah. Okay, so we've got Brent's leather dog mask that he requested again this year. I guess the leather dog masks from last year were good enough. You know, or gosh, Ben, that's a lot of scotch in your consumption request this year. Do you really need that much? You know, we were talking about it at the meeting.
You need at least that much, is what I would say. Yeah, like that's an issue. But that's the thing. I think Brenton's totally right. But to me, that speaks to like the broader flaw. Like this debate was 6 years long, and I don't know if we really got like. I don't feel like from this video, I don't think that like you get that clear of an idea of how the system works. It's just, again, like we went down so many side roads and so academic, you know. And can I say I really hate it when people say so on and so forth. And I wrote that down in my notes, and then he worked it in again. Like, that's vocal static for the educated. Is you don't go, you use awful phrases like that. People watching this, please don't do
so
that.
On and so on.
Yeah,
so
much when we get to the Zizek v. Peterson. I'm sure.
Oh dear, yeah. I probably won't be around for that one. But yeah, like to me, that's the whole reason why we didn't get to some of these big objections, like Destiny's objection to the onerousness, because Albert put it in terms of onerousness, which is a clumsy, obscure word, and he went through it fast, and Destiny like missed it the first time. Maybe because he had his face in a delicious hoagie, or maybe because like that's not really clear. Like you say effort or being menial or something just slightly clearer. I feel like besides the digression is the worst flaw of Albert's performance tonight. Was that he kind of like has these academic crutches, or just the crutches of that kind of way of speaking that led not just for the debate to go on for so long, but also like real points were missed in the debate until it was so late that the poor guys just wanted to go to bed.
That your brain turns off. Also, by the way, since we did criticize Destiny for the pizza for as long as we did, we should criticize Albert for the phone. Don't let your phone go off. If it does go off,
that's worse.
Actually,
ended the debate
when we were talking about the all of the boomer things that he was doing in those last 5 minutes. But like,
he made up the ground.
At least we've got equal opportunity now. So like, so now Michael Albert would be entitled, if you weren't too much of a boomer to not know how to do this. Now Michael Albert would be entitled to put up a YouTube video called. I don't know how he would do it. It wouldn't be leftist professor, but it would be, market apologist. Brings on friends to dunk on Michael Albert
about using his phone. Yeah. Now, but again, I got to come back to this thing because this is something that I couldn't understand about what he was trying to say, and maybe you guys caught this and I didn't. And Destiny kind of pushed back on it, but not hard enough, in my opinion. But like, what is he talking about with regard to the price increasing? If he's moved beyond markets, which I assume then is moving beyond supply and demand, then why and how would the price of something that the workers do not want to produce increase? And like, what are they even paying for it with? I'm still not clear, because again, it seems like he's okay with currency one minute and then not okay with the next.
Well, yeah, so that is one of the things that I find the most confusing about parecon is that, you know, there's all this talk about doing without markets entirely, and like sometimes when you think about the basic structure of the worker councils and the consumer councils, then I think, and this is kind of how Destiny expressed it at one point, I think, okay, I understand the sense in which this is totally marketless, because you're just, you know, there's no need to like express any of this in money. You know, you could just like have essentially like a sort of very large scale, very complicated form of bartering, you know, that like, you know, this workers' council is willing to, you know, pump out, you know, X number of dildos, and this consumer council, you know, requests, you know, Y number of dildos for this neighborhood, and, you know, and Z, you know, whatever other product. And then there's some sort of process by which the two are coordinated with each other. I will say I'm also a little fuzzy about what that process looks like. You know, but to come up with the sort of compromise proposals and go back to each group and whatever, and how to prevent this from being extremely time consuming. But like that version that I just gave is what a lot of it sounds like. And okay, I can see like a pretty rigorous sense in which this is totally non-market. I'm not 100% sure whether it'd be better for that. You know, like there are some real efficiency advantages to you know, to buying and selling over bartering, but like I understand like there's a pretty clear sense in which that's non-market. Whereas if you're like if there's still currency involved, then it seems, yeah, then it starts to seem more like some sort of, you know, okay, maybe there aren't direct market transactions, you know, between like individual consumers. Although even there, sometimes it sort of sounds like there are. And yeah, it'd be really helpful, like, because and I found that currency moment especially frustrating, because when I interviewed Albert, he said something very similar. And I was like kind of second guessing myself about whether I'd understood him correctly. So I sort of moved on, I think probably more quickly than I should have. But
it almost reminds me, and by the way, this is not, I don't mean to couch it because it's nowhere near as bad as this, but it's like when TERFs are like, abolish gender. Also, by the way, gender is endemic. Like it seems to be moving, essentially.
Yeah. So well, and again, I believe, like, I mean, he and Hot Health been working on this for so long. They've written so much about it, you know, like I believe there is an answer. I just don't think these are very clear explanations of the answer, which again is a huge problem, especially in the format of YouTube, right? You know, it's not like you can expect people to read the entire book and then they're clear on everything. But yeah, I mean, I want to know a lot more about this currency issue. Like, okay, forget for a second the question of whether it's on a debit card or whether you're exchanging paper, right? Like, is there a abstract medium of exchange that can be exchanged for anything, in which we can talk about prices, or is price being used sort of metaphorically here, you know, to mean like the number of hours that you're going to need to work in exchange for certain consumption requests or something like that.
Yeah, you know, I mean, to me, the material point here is that it's unclear. Like, we leave this debate, which had plenty of real estate to make these things clear. Like, it's not clear. And I feel like I have a slightly better understanding of this because I put in the time and read some of these books and essays and stuff. And, you know, I think it doesn't really come out as being clear. Like, getting toward the issue, my understanding is, like, this, I think this is common with market abolitionists. Like, a lot of them will say, like, first, going from capitalism, so many industries are just going to be straight public goods, you know, healthcare, education, environmental services, you know, drugs. So some things are just outside of like currency at all. Like, you know, with the usual public goods model, you don't pay. So there it would be without a currency for those sectors of the economy. But for consumer goods, like I've seen a lot of market abolitionists who are fine with like consumers having, a UBI or a jobs guarantee, something where they do get some form of token compensation, like token meaning, like something like money, which they can then use for those big, super high variety consumer goods markets, which a lot of like market socialists think are better. And this is interesting, though, because like we said, this is kind of unclear. And I think this has been a weakness throughout this debate for sure. It's interesting, Ben, that you mentioned you read a book with Eric Olin Wright and Robin Hennell where they're discussing this. I got to check this book out. And you left that feeling like the parecon was more clearly explained than this. That's also kind of interesting because, as we've said, Hennell and Albert developed this idea together. And if you look back, they did an enormous volume of writing. Like for decades, they were a writing duo and wrote like very good books, like Unorthodox Marxism, which is a great, very healthy socialist book that everyone should take a look at. It's old, but you can find copies. And that's Albert and Hennell, and they did that parecon writing together. But then they had a major falling out. And they don't write together anymore. And if you pick up that memoir, you can read one side of it. It's interesting. But what it comes down to, like Hennell, I would say, is the writer of the two. And Albert kind of concedes this in the memoir. Like he's better at getting things across in a clear and concise manner.
just out of curiosity, according to Albert, what was the falling out about?
Albert describes this is from memory, but to my memory, Albert characterizes it like Robin Hennell just came to me out of the blue and said he couldn't possibly work with me anymore. And that he was having to work with these huge text dumps of mine and cut them down into small, interesting bits, which to me sounds kind of really plausible, especially if you've read their separate writing, which we've already kind of characterized a little bit here. So to me, it's kind of fitting that parecon was sort of served better in your experience reading something by Hennell than by watching something with Albert. Frankly, I would rather see Hennell in a video medium doing a debate. I think he does, again, like shorter. And again, the whole point is that the audience understands you and mostly prefers you. That's the goal, not to like argue every point that comes up and you spend 3 hours not getting to some key issues, Or
even arguing with yourself, which I did think... plus points, it threw off Destiny because Albert would start to make a point, then attack that point on his own, and then present his actual point.
Interesting.
He'd sort of do this like weird Socratic thing that was like, well, so here's a point. Here's the standard objection to the point. Here's the response, which, I think if it's written down or you're like presenting, like doing like a presentation of an academic paper, where you're going to do it for half an hour and then there's going to be Q&A, might be an okay way to do it. I think that for a, debate or whatever we're going to call it, conversation on YouTube, I think it's not a great format.
Yeah, it caused problems, and Destiny missed a big objection. We feel like it was unclear. To me, that's at least as bad as your boomer forgetfulness phone going off, which again, that is his eating pizza. I mean, that's much worse. It ended the debate. Like that's.
I've got to talk to this person because they need to program their TV.
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
He thought it was going to be editing. He thought there would be editing, and that shows that too. He's like, "You're not editing this? Oh shit."
So, by the way, there was something that I wanted to point out, and this actually came up in my debate with David D. Friedman, which predated Ben. Both just did an amazing debate with David D. Friedman that everybody should go check out. Of course, son of Milton Friedman. But this came up with the private sector dumping public costs, like onto society. And a great example of that is actually policing in the North. That's how the Boston police, the first Northern police station ever formed. And it was because the people like the shop owners in the city who were paying for private police, essentially mercenaries, decided, hey, this is really expensive. I know, let's make the police a private good or a public good. And as a result, we went from the system that ANCAPs think we've never had and desperately want, being so garbage that they moved to the statist system where we all pay taxes for it. But that happens all over the place. And I just wanted to make sure that we did bring that up because I think Albert was really, really right about that. And I would have liked to have seen that been belabored just a little bit more if he's going to jump down every rabbit hole.
Yeah, the pharma research thing, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's something that, I think that's something that Albert was totally right about. Although also, he seemed to be like, it was one of the times. I think there were a few times in this where he was sort of proceeding as if he were talking to a lefty who, he could say something like that and they just kind of nod along. It's like, oh yeah, of course, right? He didn't really seem to be prepared to, to defend it or have, which, again, I don't know how much he knew, like, I don't know how much he knew about Destiny, before agreeing to this debate. But I mean, I think if he maybe, my guessing, come into this with a better understanding that, there are a lot of these sorts of standard lefty claims about, about how these things work, that Destiny wouldn't necessarily agree with the premise. Like, it would have been good if he'd like had in his back pocket, like a couple of at least like illustrative examples, of the way that this happens.
Yeah, and again, that lack of clarity. Because I had that same note in my notepad, like underlined, like market abolitionist, which was mentioned specifically, and then, well, they'd have different prices or they'd be paid differently. And like right away, I was like, I assume this is like the personal goods markets versus capital markets distinction that we talked about. But like I was wrote that down, like that's anyone is going to hear that and go, what the fuck prices? I thought we got rid of markets and prices. It's going to confuse people. They aren't going to understand, like, many socialists allow space for private markets for personal goods, shirts, dildos, vibrators, pleasure gel, and so on.
Yeah, which would, well, and again, I mean, I feel like even your explanation now, I'm still missing something a little bit here, because I understand that position, right? That's fine, right? I mean, that's more or less what I think, right? That they have that we should that
we should make more dildos. That's
that is.
I only heard
that's the main bullet point of what I'm trying to get across here. But no, that I think in the kind of socialism we at least know how to do right now, who knows, as technology, advances, as people sort of figure out by trial and error how to design better institutions, like whatever, que sera, sera, right? Who knows what sort of social evolution the future could bring. But if we're talking about the kind of socialism that could exist 5 minutes after capitalism, the kind of socialism that, like, right now all we're separated, like the only reason we can't have it right now is that it would be a incredibly arduous and difficult political struggle to achieve it, right? That kind of socialism, but not a logistical problem. Then yeah, I mean, what you're describing is I think exactly my position, that healthcare, education, broadband, et cetera, should be decommodified. That commanding heights of the economy, things like banking, should be under some form of public ownership. And yeah, maybe to make the whiskey and the coffee and the dildos and whatnot, so on and so on and so on.
You had to get it in.
We have, maybe we do need market signals for that stuff for the moment, right? So we might need a market sector for that, but at least it could be a market sector made up of worker-owned firms. That would be. Like, that's my view. I mean, that's the book that I'm working on with Bhaskar and Mike Beggs. But Albert talks as if he has a much more market abolitionist view than that, but then it becomes very unclear with the stuff about indicative prices. Again, I can believe easily that he and Hanhel have somewhere a well worked out solution to it, but that solution is certainly not usefully clarified by saying, we barely have currency right now, people use credit cards. I mean, that just sort of sounds like a weird misunderstanding of the question.
Oh, that was so cringe.
What I'm wondering about is maybe what's happening here is he's been at this so long that certain things are so much a part of his reality that he's not even thinking about them anymore. It's almost like when you argue with ANCAPs, they will sometimes argue with ANCAPs a lot. That's why this keeps coming up. But they will make assumptions about a statist society that they then project into their version of a stateless society. Or to give kind of the inverse argument, if you're fielding an argument, like they'll try to pin you down an ANCOM and be like, what are the universal rules of ANCOM society with regard to handling of property? And of course, the answer to that is, how could there possibly be universal rules? There is no state to enforce them, so you can only really have general rules here. So I'm just wondering if it's something like that, where the fact that these things will be decided by price is the actual explanation of that. He knows it, but it's so in the background radiation that he doesn't feel he even needs to say it.
Yeah, that maybe. I mean, I kind of don't think his answer is the one that you just gave, because it seems like the nature of parecon is it's an attempt to work out like very specific rules of a kind that would, at least in the model, exist throughout the economy. Maybe Albert and Hounhell would admit that in especially since I think both of them describe themselves as anarchists, which brings up a whole other realm of objections. But I mean, like, they seem to be, so maybe they would admit, okay, reality would be messier and more complicated than our model, but at least their model seems to be something that's presented as if it would be universal. And I think the indicative prices are supposed to be somehow part of that universal model. But again, I don't, it's very unclear to me how. I do agree with the background radiation thing, that it could just be that, like, there's some wonky answer to this within this system, that, like, Albert has spent so many decades at this point thinking about this and sort of like doing deep dives on what all the problems would be, that at this point he's sort of, I mean, this happens all the time, right? With like things that within people who think about something all the time, something just goes without saying to them, and then they forget that to, like, normies who aren't steeped in the hyper specific debates that they are, it's not all obvious, which is something, something that I think about, which is something I think about a lot. So anyway, this has been a lot of words for the prices thing. Was not just, I mean, fair is fair. The prices thing was not just unclear to Destiny. The prices thing was unclear to the three socialists who were watching it, by the way, and we should wrap up soon because this has been 3.5 hours, but I wanted, you mentioned, Brent, the debate with David Friedman, and I have to say, and again, who knows, like, this is always one of the the things that's innately unfair about doing these debate reviews, because, like, what's totally unknowable is what somebody's considered position is years later on what they should have said, but like, even a week after that debate with David Friedman, there are lots of things about that debate that I'm happy about how they went, but it's like, literally, like, I think this morning while I was in the shower, it hit me that a lot of that debate ended up being spent on this subject of why, if workers' control is so much better, than capitalism, why workers don't more frequently start co-ops, in capitalist economies. And I think I had some answers to that I would stand by, right? Mm-hmm. That I think we're right, even in retrospect. But also, because Friedman calls himself an anarcho-capitalist, it like finally occurred to me today. It's like, why the hell didn't I just say, hey, you're an anarcho-capitalist. I shouldn't need to convince you that there is massive state intervention on behalf of the biggest businesses that gives them a competitive edge, over everybody else. This is a totally libertarian point.
Yeah.
It's a debate, man. You can't. It's like having an argument with someone like it's inevitable. It is brutal, though. Like, I'm sorry you had that experience today. Like, that's terrible. Like, it's.
Yeah, it's fine. But like the point is just that, like, so who knows, maybe like a week after this, Michael Albert had one of those moments where he's like, why the hell didn't I just point out that that the more profitable stocks trade at a higher price, that seems like that would have been sufficient for that moment. So anyway, interpretive charity, whatever. Don't assume that what people are saying on either side in any of these things is the best they could possibly do. On further consideration. Last thing I wanted to bring up before giving you guys a chance to plug your pluggables and calling it for the night. By the way, thank you for the recommendation for the Doug Henwood book about Wall Street. I think it looks like it's out of print, but they do have a few copies on Amazon.
Yeah, you can get them used.
Yeah. So the thing about licensing reminded me. This is a little self-indulgent, but before we leave, Rob, have you watched the Dave Rubin's conversation with Joe Rogan on regulation?
I've only seen the part where Rogan swats him aside. I saw that highlight on the Twitter machine. I haven't seen anything beyond that. Probably not representative piece, but I do love it.
So let me see if I can. This might not be the right one, but I think this is it. I just want to play a couple minutes of it because this is on exactly the topic that you were talking about why. Oh, let's just eliminate barriers to entry by not having.
That's right. That's right. He talks about codes. Yeah, no, perfect. Yeah.
Let's
see this.
All right.
If folks haven't seen this, they should see it. It's high quality.
I haven't seen it, so I'm excited.
Oh, you're in for a treat.
My God, Dave Rubin. Just his face.
That's the most vacant expression I've ever seen on a human face.
No, he's a truth teller. You guys are crazy.
Yeah.
It's like the question became a human face.
What if the post office closed tomorrow? It would be all right. You'd still get mail. Amazon would pick. No, it wouldn't. Amazon would pick that up
through UPS. It would cost a lot more.
It wouldn't though. Competition would start kicking in, and between UPS and FedEx and Amazon and drones and blah 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 and DA.
I'm sorry.
It wouldn't though. Competition would start kicking in, and between UPS and FedEx and Amazon and drones and blah 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 and DHL,
definitely blah blah blah.
It would probably drop prices because right now we've just got this artificial thing that sits there that then allows them
tight
to
policy
price according
argument
to that. But if you drop that, why is the government in that business anymore? I have 3 chickens. I've really done the Joe Rogan lifestyle here over the last couple of years. So I have 3 chickens right now. I'm going to give you a good UPS story. We ordered them. They were born in August on a Monday in Cleveland. They hatched that day. They threw them in a box with a little hole, USPS, and they showed up at my door in LA on a Tuesday. The USPS has been doing that for about 100 years.
It's the only way you can do it, by the way. You can't order chickens through any other method.
Oh, is it just USPS?
Yeah.
So actually, I was giving the USPS credit there because my chickens all arrived live.
Yeah, they send them chicks.
Yeah.
That's the only you're buying these live chicks. That's the way you get them. You get them through the U.S. Postal Service.
But
you don't get them through UPS.
I'm pretty sure, though, that if the USPS stopped, it didn't exist anymore, you could still get chickens delivered. And Amazon could probably do it even more effectively.
Oh, look at Michael Brooks. Oh, Michael. That's not even the embarrassing part I was thinking of. I was thinking about that part about construction and building codes. Maybe that's later.
Oh my God.
That's
By
not
the
even
way,
the brutal part.
I have 9 chickens, so eat it, Dave Rubin.
Looking for conspiracies everywhere, man. I keep hearing them now about Anthony Bourdain, that Bourdain was going to expose some child pedophile ring, and that's why they suicided him. It's fucking stupid, man.
Without going down fully on that road, there is one odd thing about the Bourdain thing, which is just a few weeks ago. Didn't he tweet some odd thing about having he's met the Hillary Clinton like machine or something? And it's pretty
he was
evil.
talking about no.
No.
All right.
Look at that.
I thought this was the. I I thought this was the video where he does this, but it's somewhere.
This was a delightful clip. I can't even.
It just felt so good to see the back of Michael Brooks' teeth again. Man's a laugher.
Yeah.
We think that's what they do. I think they're just misrepresenting. I don't think they're saying the opposite of the truth. They just
We all focus on the thing of the left is because it has.
All right. I'm not going to keep trying to find this, but the clip that I wanted was Rubin says in the the thing that we watched was from it, right? Like I just can't easily find the whole thing. So Rubin's trying to explain why he's a libertarian, and he says, "Oh, name one thing that the government does well," and Rogan, because like whatever, Rogan is a very mixed bag politically, and he believes some stupid shit, but like, he's also like a decently intelligent human being who lives in the world, and so he obviously said, "Well, what about the post office? I think they do that pretty good." And then Rubin says, "Oh no, they don't. Post office, it's fine. It could disappear tomorrow, and the Amazon and UPS and drones and the competition would start kicking in, and then they move on to regulation." And because Rubin sort of backs off of the post office thing a little bit, and he says, they do. We don't need all these stupid regulations, like building codes. You can't have the power line, blah blah blah, this close to whatever. And Rogan again, like, and this is my favorite version of Joe Rogan, right? Like, there's this sort of like, often a conspiracy theory rabbit hole Joe Rogan. There's the like being way too reactive about cultural things Joe Rogan. But my favorite iteration of Joe Rogan is just the one where he's like, he sounds like slightly stoned, but he's just giving like the obvious responses to nonsense like this that like any reasonably smart adult should give like the first time they hear these libertarian arguments. So there's a great one that he has with Dan Crenshaw where he's doing this to push back against Crenshaw's stuff about how if we have a right to healthcare, that makes doctors slaves because that means we have a right to their service. And Rogan just doing it there is like, I don't think so, dude. That doesn't make sense, and he's doing the same thing here. Rogan's like, well, I don't know. I think that's pretty important, to have like regulations, about building codes so people don't die and, because they're cutting corners and the stuff like, look at countries that don't have as many of these regulations. That stuff happens all the time. I think this is actually pretty important. And in that conversation, Rubin actually says that we wouldn't need building codes because Yelp reviews for construction companies would like, provide the market incentive to not cut corners like that.
Oh my God. I just like an extra demon just jumped into my body, like just from hearing that. Like, oh my God. Wow.
It is great to see. Yeah, that's the Joe Rogan that endorsed Bernie. Like that's the good egg in there. But I prefer that clip you brought up, Ben, anyway, because it let me see laughing Michael Brooks and it filled my heart with joy.
Yeah.
That was
nobody was ever like I was like the first time I met Michael, we were at a conference and we both had book contracts for Zero, so we like Doug Lane, the editor of Zero Books, had like meetings he was going to do with both of us, so he just like combined it and brought us both to the bar that afternoon. And like there was we had a few drinks, ended up mostly just talking to Michael, and we hit it off. And it's like, oh, I should have you on my show sometime, brother, or whatever. But like I always think like the actual friendship started when we were walking back from the bar to the to the like university building where the conference was happening. And I won't repeat it on air, but like he I was a little buzzed. There was friendly atmosphere. And he said something that kind of gave me an opening to make a, slightly unkind joke at his expense, and I made it, and he just like tipped back his head and laughed like it was the funniest fucking thing he had ever heard in his entire life. Which, you know, I can't take too much credit for, because as we saw in that clip, like he laughed like that a lot. Like nobody, like amused Michael Brooks is, you know, was the most amused human being ever.
Yeah, you know, a very unique presence on the left. A guy who laughs a lot. We don't have a lot of those guys. Like that's I like that, you know, and it's stolen from us. The man's our Breitbart. That's what I say.
Which I know what you mean by it. That's
yeah, you know, like with a negative sign in front of him, like as good as he was bad. It's, you know, you can understand. Mirror image, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, and
Benvolio to Breitbart's Tybalt.
Ooh,
Shakespeare joke. There you go. That's what you get the theater major for.
Yeah, fair enough. So I did. And also, since I believe Brent made this joke last time, and Andy J. Andrew World, our graphic designer, actually made an image for it. This is for. Here we go. So
nice.
Argument science.
Yes. See?
Yes. Oh, that is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
You need to put that out on a T-shirt right now.
Yeah, that's what Andy said.
This is making me very happy.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe we should have some GTA merch. Have the Argument Science That Theater 3000 T-shirts and mugs.
That's beautiful. I love that we inspired fan art. That's incredible. Or I guess does it count as fan art if they work on the show?
Yeah, that's a little complicated, but yeah, he does. Like if you make, it is amazing how quickly he works. Sometimes, like you know, somebody will make a visual joke, you know, or an easily visually represented joke, you know, on a stream that he's watching, and like 15 minutes later he'll message me and be like, "All right, I made it. Here it is."
That's great. Sorry, who made that thing? That's kind of fun.
J. Andrew World, he's the graphic design guy for GTA. He's the one who makes not all of the clip thumbnails. Some of that's Kelly Carey's, like the YouTube manager, but all of the like episode and stream thumbnails pretty much are all Andy. So he's actually a really talented guy who does he's also done like album art and comic books and other things, you know. So yeah, if you have unmet graphic design needs, J. Andrew World, you should check him out.
Yeah, I got to get that file. That's fantastic.
All right,
I will be sure. Please put that out on Facebook. I will be sure to share it.
Yeah. So let's see. I've got. Well, actually, here you guys want to go first. So, Rob, you got anything coming up you want to plug before we go?
Yeah, in a little bit. I've got an article coming out on the current affairs on the Facebook oversight board, which is unbelievably powerful and made up of people that the company picked, and it has incredible power over us. They're about to decide whether Trump gets to go back on Facebook, for example, and it's just some law professors and NGOs that are empowered. That'll be out in a little while, though. That's coming out. And I've got an article with Nathan Robinson that we're writing on Bill Gates. We're trying to do the definitive Gates piece. I'm doing the Microsoft part, and he's doing everything else, which is a good thing. And also some videos coming out on current affairs on the YouTube channel, which folks should look at if they want some more fun leftist content with editing and nice production value and everything. You know, folks can check that out. I have an article there on iPhones and the public research into that. If folks don't want to read about it, they can watch that. And an article, a video on climate that's coming out soon. And of course, there's the world of publishing. You too can fan your books in this manner. That's me.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, hey, I'm Brenton Lengel. I am the author of, and hey, I can show off my books here, Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. which this is a Ringo-nominated comic series, and we are going on to like our 4th and 5th book. I'm really excited with where the series is going. I am also creating, for the leftists out there, a comic series about the life and death of anarchist Buenaventura Durruti. For those of you who have not heard about him, he's basically the anarchist Che Guevara, and it looks incredible. I'm working with a Spanish artist who's friends with people in the CNT-FI, and it's just so exciting. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. I also have a debate with Destiny coming up on the 26th. That's this coming Friday, 8 p.m. on Modern Day Debate. If you want to see the previous clip of me and on Destiny's stream, just Google my name, Brent Lengel, and you'll find my my YouTube. It's right up there on the YouTube. And fun fact, Destiny, I stuck Destiny's head on Destiny of the Endless from Neil Gaiman's Sandman series in the thumbnail because I'm just that big of a geek. So yeah, please do check that out.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I should say, speaking of modern debate, I am going to be back there on Tuesday at 8 to argue about the death penalty with a couple of gents that I'm not familiar with, but it's a 4-way thing. So my debate partner there is Dylan Burns of the Hippy Dippy Roundtable. So looking forward to that. I'm glad we could rustle somebody up since I'd sort of suggested that a while ago. We were talking about the topics that I'd be interested in doing debates about on there. That the death penalty would be a good one, but it was a little difficult at first to find somebody, which is actually sort of encouraging that, like, even if a lot of people are passively okay with the death penalty, that you have, a relative shortage of people who are like, yeah, I'm gonna step up and argue for that.
Let's kill people.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, on this channel on Monday at 7:30. For the regular episode for this week, I am going to be talking to Dr. Abdul El-Sayed about this book that he and Micah Johnson just came out with, Medicare for All, A Citizen's Guide, and then Natalie Scher, continuing the Medicare for All discussion, about some stuff she's written for The Nation and Jacobin about strategy for trying to achieve Medicare for All, and on Wednesday for the movie live stream, Jacobin deputy editor Micah Utrecht and left historian extraordinaire Daniel Bessner, and our producer Forrest and philosophy professor Ryan Lake and I are going to be talking about Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers. And so on Thursday for patrons, the patron exclusive episode for this week is going to be a discussion between me and Jean Bajalan and Pascal Robert about the National Review's defense of the British monarchy. They really did put that out last week, which. I always thought American conservatives liked 1776 and the independence from Britain, but apparently they hate Meghan Markle so much they've decided that they like the British monarchy now. And on Friday, Jennifer is going to be back for the No Politics Philosophy Friday. Not quite sure what we're going to cover this time yet, but always fun. People should check that out. And next Sunday, I think. For this, I believe J.G. Michaels from the Parallax Views podcast is going to come on the debate, and this is actually what J.G. and I are going to discuss is a variation of one. It's not the one that Brent brought to my attention, but it's closely related. I believe we are going to watch, or it might be audio only, but whatever, listen to and break down on the stream. This is a real thing that happened. Timothy Leary's debate from 1990 with G. Gordon Liddy.
Oh my!
Whoa,
that'll be very interesting.
Man, a lot of stimulating leftist video content. That's good stuff.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And if you enjoy all this stimulating content, because whatever the parecon alternative to the kind of currency that we have now, whatever that turns out to look like, doesn't exist yet. So if you enjoy all this content and you want to pay all the people who help produce it, go to patreon.com /Ben Burgess, and for the monthly cost of a milkshake at a 50s nostalgia diner in 1994, you get the patron bonus episode every week. That was we were making fun of Michael Albert for being too much of a boomer, and that definitely revealed me as too much of a Gen Xer. But get that patron bonus episode every week. You get the access to the Discord, get regularly scheduled Discord office hours group chat, and we're also starting to do the monthly Discord movie night. So lots of good stuff there, and of course, again, it helps make all this magic happen. But meanwhile, thank you guys. This was almost 4 hours. This was a this is part 2, so this was a real commitment. But this is one of the ones that I knew I wanted to do, since I knew a little bit about it. I'd seen a few minutes of it, but I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to get myself to block out 2.5 hours to watch this debate if I wasn't doing it for this. So I really appreciate that you guys did this with me, and I will see both of you in various places very soon. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Pleasure, man.
All right. Thanks. Left is best.